Alright, folks. Today's story is about a woman who died in the line of duty at the age of 34. A perp she was chasing stabbed her real nasty. Her favorite fantasy novel was a romance thing where the main character becomes a saint. She's got tons of followers, worships the sun god, and basically saves the world. Suddenly, our girl wakes up to some dude yelling in her face. He's all impatient, asking when she's gonna snap out of it. And he reminds her he warned her she could even die, but at least get buried in the main temple. The angry dude's asking why she keeps crawling back to the family. She's totally confused, wondering if she's really dead and if this is heaven. The girl figures it ain't heaven when the guy says he can't stand her scandalous behavior anymore. He ordered the servants to get her out of here, lock her in her room, no water, and kick her out to the main temple at dawn. The heroine couldn't believe she was letting these weak maids just drag her away. She wondered to herself, did all her muscle just vanish when she died? And the young guy at the table complained that this pathetic scene had ruined his appetite. The guy turned to Ordell and asked how much longer he had to look at her face because just seeing her made him want to hurl. The main character wondered if her name was really Ordell. The name sounded familiar and gave her a bad feeling. Suddenly, a screen popped up in front of her, with text from the AI system managing the changes. The system greeted Cha Si-wan and informed her that she was now inhabiting the body of a saint named Ordell Kiris. The heroine was in shock and couldn't believe this was happening, and that an AI system was talking to her about inhabiting another body. The system promised to sincerely help her succeed in this world, and she was totally confused, wondering if other people could see these messages. Ordell Kiris was just a regular girl until she suddenly awakened some divine power, not much to speak of, but Count Kiris wanted to turn her into a full-blown saint. See, the family that produces a saint can grab a ton of power, so the Count hooked up with the head priest from some backwater temple. The priest knew turning a normal girl into a saint was messed up, but he couldn't stand watching his temple go down the drain anymore. So he took the offer, but with a catch about penance, while the Count started bending Ordell to his will so he could control the sun god's temple. And that's how, through manipulation and brainwashing, Ordell became a fake saint. Later on, when the real saint, the main character, took her rightful place, Ordell got jealous and started stirring up all kinds of trouble. She ended up getting executed by the novel's heroes. Cha Si-wan admitted to herself that even she, when she read the novel, was totally down on Ordell. But the novel's heroine grew up in such a messed-up environment, she easily could have become the villain. And now that Cha Si-wan's going through it herself, she almost feels sorry for Ordell. She couldn't figure out why. Thinking she was headed for paradise, she ended up stuck in Ordell's body. Suddenly, the screen popped up again, saying the system accepted the request. The girl grabbed him, screaming she'd smash that stupid screen if they didn't give her paradise back. The system explained her soul was chosen by this world's sun god as an apostle and was implanted into a body. The girl started laughing hysterically from shock and panic, wondering if she was legally allowed to curse now. The next message from the system informed the girl that the sun god originally wanted to reincarnate her. But due to some shortage, he had to implant her into an existing body. The heroine sarcastically asked if he was short on brains. The next second, the system added that the sun god didn't have enough divine power to reincarnate her. The girl asked the system what the heck this god wanted from her and demanded a quest, ASAP. The system presented a quest, save the sun that rose from the dead, because the sun god's temple is almost gone due to lack of believers. She was offered to become a saint, attract believers, increase divine power, save the pathetic god, and save the world from destruction. The reward for success was riches, fame, and a saint's position. The penalty for failure was the eternal obliteration of the resurrected sun and the destruction of the dimension. The girl realized in horror it was a total nightmare, and asked the obvious question, if we leave everything as is, the main character will come and do it all herself, so why does she need to bother? The system explained that the current world could diverge from the original plot, since it's a year before the original story begins. Therefore, relationships with all the characters can be rebuilt. The system presented a candidate for the main character, who also happens to be the High Priest, Eric. Another candidate for the main character was the commander of the Knight's Order, Seth. Also introduced was the original antagonist, Duke Sierra Root. The girl panicked and didn't know what to do because she expected to die and go to heaven, but someone started her second life according to their own plan. This was incredibly infuriating, but now Chasiwan roughly understood why she was inhabiting Ordel. After all, even though she has little divine power, she holds the position of a saint, so it will be easy to start all sorts of big projects. The girl decided that as an ordinary person, she wouldn't be able to save the world and its god, so she would relax and let the main character save the world. Besides, the Count said he'd kick her out to the main temple in the morning, and the girl was actually looking forward to it. She's gonna tell them she's giving up being the sun god's chosen one. So, 3 days later, Chasiwan's carriage was headed to the main temple. That's where you gotta go to renounce your sainthood. But the temple's so far away, the poor girl's been starving for 3 days straight. A memory flashed in her head of the Count ordering his men to drag her out and lock her in a room without water. To herself, she was fuming about how someone could be so cruel as to withhold water, and decided Kiri's was definitely the worst. The girl was despairing, saying she'd starve to death before even reaching the temple. By the way, before leaving for the temple, she spent ages searching for the system in the attic. Turns out, the newly minted saint's current level of divine power is 2%. If she attracts believers instead of the powerless god, her strength will increase. The girl wondered why she should even bother fighting evil when Iliad, another heroine, will show up in a year and take care of it herself. That's when the number of believers would skyrocket, but the system responded to her question. It said that info was off limits and she needed to hit 40% divine power to get an answer. She was furious. How could the system drop her here without asking, then hide the truth? Her outrage was drowned out by a savage hunger. Yelling and arguing with the system just wore her out even more. She decided she'd have to beg for food when she got there, and felt like she was about to pass out. Throwing open the carriage door and tumbling out, the newly minted saint face-planted into something soft and warm. For a few seconds, the exhausted and drained girl was in bliss. She asked in surprise what was so warm, and noted that she felt like she was coming back to life. You can imagine the guy's shock. He addressed the girl, calling her a saint. The dude was ridiculously handsome, but the poor thing didn't even notice, 'cause all she could think about was food. The next second, she was pathetically begging the priest to feed her. Didn't take much begging. Before long, happy as a clam, Ordel was chowing down inside the sacred halls. Standing before her was the high priest of the temple, Dirt. The only guy who knew her holiness was a total sham. The girl remembered that in the future, this very priest would fall head over heels for the real heroine and become one of the guys who'd try to take her down. The priest gently suggested she slow down, worried she might choke. Ordel thanked him. After collecting herself a bit, she apologized to the young man, explaining she hadn't been herself. He told her it was no big deal. He added that she looked really tired, so she shouldn't sweat the small stuff. The girl knew that in the story, Ordel shamelessly mocked Eric, so any sudden apologies would look super sus. The girl steeled herself and decided to lay it all out for the priest right then and there. She started by saying she needed to tell him something. But Ordel felt her legs turning to jelly. She cranked up her acting skills to the max, and explained that after his visit to her family, she'd done a lot of soul-searching and realized that the title just wasn't for her. The girl confessed that pretending to be a saint was stressing her out, which is why she was lashing out at everyone. She apologized and offered to personally atone to everyone, but the priest flat out refused. Eric declared that Ordel couldn't just give up her title as a saint, and insisted she take back her words. The girl admitted to herself that she hadn't expected such resistance, then said that if the priest was worried about donations from the Kiri's family, he shouldn't be, because she wasn't planning on going back to the family, and they'd never find out about her leaving. The priest replied that it wasn't just about the donations. He explained that he couldn't let someone live a lie. Ordel retorted, asking if it wasn't worse to deceive everyone by passing off a fake as a saint. But the high priest remained unyielding, firmly stating that the saint's place was here, in the temple of the sun god, and that was final. Left alone with her thoughts, she noted to herself that she seemed to have struck a nerve with the priest, and he was pissed. She thought that if she resolved the donation issue, he'd let her go, but she was wrong. The girl decided not to give up, and reminded herself that she was the tireless detective Chasiwan from the Major Crimes Unit. While she figured out how to convince Eric, she decided to check out the room, hoping to find something useful. It was only now that she noticed how luxurious the room was. She hadn't even paid attention before because she was so hungry. The inconsistency bothered her. Even the food was fancy, but a temple dedicated to the sun god was supposed to be poor. Something wasn't adding up. So, the girl decided to first look for any secret stash the real Ordelia had. She needed money to make it on her own. As she looked around, she spotted a door and wondered what kind of room was hidden behind it. Then she saw a ton of dresses and realized it must be a walk-in closet. Not only were there a lot of outfits, but they were all made from expensive fabrics and looked super lavish. She figured Ordelia must have been blowing money on luxury, so there probably weren't any secret savings left. Just then, someone yelled that he was there to collect the dirty dishes. It was probably the head priest of the sun god's temple. When the guy came into the room, he explained that the high priest had forgotten to do it. The guy who walked in was Dietrich Warren, the head priest of the sun god temple. The girl gave him the okay to take the dishes. The priest immediately noticed Ordell was acting weird. He asked her why she suddenly started being so formal with him. Usually, the saint talked down to him, so Dietrich instantly knew something was up. The girl tried to weasel her way out of it. She claimed she'd had some recent realizations and wanted to change. The priest was totally baffled. The heroine started saying she was really sorry she'd been so rude. She declared she wasn't cut out to be a saint and would soon give up the title and leave. The priest was outraged. He said, "You can't just give up being a saint like that." Then she asked, with fake innocence, if it was okay for her to stay there. His reaction wasn't exactly eloquent. The priest just froze, speechless with shock. The girl thought to herself that he couldn't even pretend it was okay. To smooth things over, she hurried to assure him she wasn't leaving right away, but would first make amends to the temple. Ordell admitted that, while sorting through her dresses, she realized she'd been way too extravagant with the temple's funds. Dietrich reported this conversation to the high priest, and Eric was puzzled. He was especially surprised by her wanting to sell that dress, the one Count Kiris bought for Ordell on her first day at the temple. Dietrich said the saint wanted cash for the dress, and Eric figured the Count must be behind it somehow. And finally, Ordell admitted that the Count doesn't give a damn about her. Even during their rare meetings, the high priest noticed Count Kiris never said a single kind word to Ordell. If the girl's admitting that, then her changed behavior and sorrow now make sense. So does her sudden change in attitude. But the fact she wanted to keep the money from the dress meant she still had some kind of connection to the Kiris estate. The high priest decided they could sell the dress like the saint suggested to pad the coffers, and ordered Dietrich to oversee the whole thing from now on. He also ordered the senior priest to watch the saint's every move, 'cause she's acting weird. Meanwhile, Ordell was staring at that very dress. She figured that dress had to be worth a fortune and decided to save it for a rainy day. The main character woke up realizing with pure joy that she didn't have to go to work on a weekday morning. It felt like total bliss, like she was dreaming. She was amazed they fed her on time, cleaned up after her, and she could lounge around till noon without anyone saying a word. She even started to think maybe being a saint wasn't so bad, and maybe she'd stick around for a year. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was a maid, announcing that breakfast was ready. Ordell exclaimed happily and rushed to the table. The maid also exclaimed, but not happily, more like in a panic, because she'd completely dropped a piece of meat from the plate. She started begging for forgiveness, admitting she messed up, and pleaded not to be hit, mumbling about how she'd ruined the saint's precious soup. Seeing this, the girl realized in horror that she didn't want to stay here, because the temple staff clearly had some serious mental issues if they reacted like that to a simple mistake. The girl wondered, was the old Ordell really that cruel, beating them? She tried to calm the maid, telling her it was okay and to get up, but the maid kept begging her not to hit her. The heroine was even more surprised, and then assured the maid she wasn't mad and told her she could go. The maid, still fearfully muttering apologies to the saint, ran away so fast you couldn't even hear her footsteps or the door slam. Ordell worriedly thought that she hadn't realized things were this messed up. She wondered what Ordell had done to the maid to make her so terrified. But then she thought, hey, the food didn't do anything wrong. The heroine decided to eat first and think later, and wished herself bon appétit. After eating, she figured she should take the empty dishes herself, because if she called the maid again, she might just faint. The thing is, Ordell had no idea where the kitchen was. Suddenly, a screen popped up in front of the girl, announcing that the sun god temple map had been unlocked. The heroine was stoked about this system feature. With a playful grumble, she thought they could have mentioned this feature sooner, and decided to use the map to find the kitchen. The second she opened the door, she was met with a bunch of wide-eyed, shocked faces. Everyone was staring at her. She figured whatever the old Ordell had done, the reaction was honestly a little too intense. The girl realized this was the temple staff's dining hall when a guy's voice suddenly called out to her, It was the high priest, asking how the holy woman ended up here. Ordal explained she was trying to take the empty plates to the kitchen, but it looked like she took a wrong turn. She apologized for interrupting their chill lunch, and Eric politely offered to take the dishes himself. He reassured her that she hadn't made a mistake at all, and that the saintess was free to move about the temple as she pleased. The girl realized that whatever the priests really thought of her, they were still treating her properly in front of others, which made her feel both awkward and pleased at the same time. Then her attention was drawn to the food on the table, watery soup and stale bread. Ordal asked, puzzled, what this meager diet was, and she realized it wasn't anything like what she had been eating. The girl also noticed that there were even children here, which made the contrast even more striking. She looked at the meager food and thought to herself that she was the only one eating like she was in a fancy restaurant. The young man asked if Ordal was all right. She composed herself and reminded him that she had talked about selling her belongings. Eric said that he had heard about it from Priest Dietrich and added that they were going to follow through with her decision. Then she firmly ordered them to take care of it as soon as possible. We're gonna use the money to upgrade the food, especially for the kids. She also announced she's eating the same meals as them from now on. The priest started to argue, but she cut him off, saying it's fine. He finally caved and agreed it'd be done. The heroine, not wasting any time, demanded they start right away. The heroine looked around the temple and sadly admitted she knew it was in trouble, but not this bad. The garden was depressing, and the hallways she saw on the way were just as run down. Even the prayer room, which should be a sanctuary, was a mess. The temple servants of the sun god were scared, begging forgiveness for being in the holy woman's way, or praying at that time. The heroine remarked that even the food was worse than she thought. Everything was just so neglected. The girl admitted to herself that she'd been trying to ignore the poverty, thinking everything would be fixed when Adela showed up. But she totally forgot that until Adela arrived, the people in the temple would be suffering. Now she's seen it all and can't ignore it anymore. So she hit up the system asking if she could swap out the quest reward, 'cause she wasn't interested in living the charmed life of a saint. Instead, she wanted a guarantee that after she kicked the bucket, she'd get into heaven and finally chill out. The system chirped back, saying the son resurrected from death had tweaked things. Now accepting the quest meant getting the saint's riches, fame, and power. Plus, it guaranteed the right to choose what happens after you die, so with a sigh she agreed and took the quest. A notification popped up, quest accepted. User Cha Si-wan is now the Saint of the Sun resurrected from death. Then it offered her a peek at the bonus reward for accepting the quest, which totally surprised her. There's another reward? That was a nice surprise, but she decided to check out the reward later, especially since she was surrounded by staff right now, not to mention that dude waiting for her to leave the garden. Instead, our girl asked the system if there was any way to boost her divine power without racking up more followers. The system suggested donating to the offering box, because donations are a voluntary gift or contribution to a deity. This girl was pissed. She's stuck in a body with zero cash and now they want money. Straight up robbery, she says. But then it hit her. The temple's gotta eat better, and since they're broke, even the dough she gets for selling that blue dress has gotta be donated. Ordal decided the first thing she's gotta do is find that offering box, so everyone can see how she's gonna turn this temple around. Later on, the temple priests were jawing about the saint's weird behavior. They were like, no way Ordal actually didn't know how bad things were here, right? I mean, the first day she got to the main temple, she saw the dining hall and immediately ordered all her meals to be brought to her room. Eric and Dietrich were saying she had to know the food sucked, so they were wondering why she was so shocked today. Dietrich confessed he totally freaked out today, thinking the saint was out in the garden, bawling her eyes out all alone. He pointed out that someone changing like that is kinda unsettling. The high priest thinks there's no way Ordal didn't know how things were at the temple. I mean, she slashed the priest's portions herself to upgrade her own grub, and now she's all shocked about it? One of them guessed, maybe she's got a soft spot for kids, 'cause even though she's always yelling, she never lays a hand on them. Another guy piped up, saying we gotta remember how she's treated people up to now. Then you'd get that it's not just some soft spot for kids, but that something changed in her heart after that trip to the Count's estate. The high priest stated firmly that he couldn't let her do whatever she wanted. He explained that one way to boost a deity's power is by absorbing other major temples. If word gets out that the saint's gone missing, the other main temples will immediately start threatening this place. And a saint left all alone is definitely going to be in danger. Eric pointed out that the main temple's survival depends on whether or not they have someone the god favors. Even if she's a fake, she's the reason they've been able to keep the main temple afloat at all. Besides, they've put up with all her numerous shenanigans up to this point. Suddenly, Dietrich remembered he had to report that the commander of the Holy Knights would be finishing his away mission and arriving tomorrow. The high priest was surprised, realizing it had already been 6 months since he got shipped out here. Time sure flies. The high priest ordered them to let him know the second the Holy Knight commander arrived. It had put Eric more at ease knowing he was here. The priest breathed a sigh of relief thinking about the Holy Knight commander, Seth Noan, the sword protecting their main sun god temple. Suddenly, their conversation was cut short when a holy woman appeared, politely asking the high priest to come with her to the kitchen. She added that it was urgent. So in the kitchen, they found a guy who introduced himself as Kento, the head chef. The holy woman acted surprised to find anyone there at this hour, and Kento definitely looked nervous. Ordell, staying cool, said the chef's food was especially amazing today, and she just wanted to express her thanks. Kento, smelling a rat, thought this might be a fancy way of saying the food was terrible. To herself, the girl admitted she couldn't just tell him she was there to shake him down. According to the original story, Kento was Count Kiris's spy, skimming off the Count's donations under the guise of food expenses for the saint. The girl was dead set on cleaning up the organization, and that meant rooting out the corruption from within first. The novel said Kento's hidden stash was in the kitchen. You could see from the marks on the floor that something had been dragged, which made the saint want to give the kitchen a thorough look. Kento suggested the saint and high priest come tomorrow after lunch, since he still needed to prep the ingredients. Suddenly, Kento noticed the saint had walked over to the wall. He yelled, asking what she was doing and demanding she step away immediately. Ordell thought to herself that the man's over-the-top reaction meant there was something behind the wall, despite his protests. The girl said she just felt like pushing on the wall. Who knew it would open up a secret room? Kento was seething, while Ordell was stunned by how much money was inside, like someone had been hiding it, or maybe pocketing it. The heroine grinned, because exposing corruption was Detective Chasi Wu's specialty. She always found where the crooks hid their cash, quick as lightning. Then, the high priest turned to the head chef, demanding an explanation for what was going on. The guy stammered and stuttered, blurting out that he didn't know anything. It was all just a big misunderstanding. Ordell thought to herself that when Eric got angry and polite at the same time, it was even scarier. The high priest declared sternly that Kento was the one who'd have to explain himself to the commander of the Holy Knights. The guy was trembling with fear. Then he blew up like a firecracker, suddenly lunging at the holy woman, yelling that it was all her fault. The priest shouted the saint's name in fright and rushed to help, but Ordell didn't even flinch. She knew these kinds of scumbags never disappointed. The second they're backed into a corner, they always lash out at the weakest one. The saint was relieved she'd gotten that perk beforehand and decided to test it out. The system activated the skill called Body Enhancement, and then our girl suggested Kento get a taste of her knuckle sandwich. The guy just made this weird noise, totally caught off guard, then got launched like he was hit by a freaking truck. Eric and Dietrich were speechless, but the saint's just smirking. She thanked the head chef for his years of service, wishing him a long and peaceful retirement. Then Ordell happily told the high priest they were suddenly swimming in cash. She figured it was a blessing from on high, a gift to the main temple. Suddenly, a warning message popped up on the screen. The heroine was totally confused, and right after that she felt her head spinning. The system explained that it happened because she used a skill that drained most of her stamina. She was seriously pissed that just one skill could do that to her. A notification popped up. All physical strength depleted, the body can't take the strain, prepare to black out. Ordell was fuming inside, wondering why no one had said a damn thing about this before, as the priest freaked out and ran to the saint, shouting her name. Hours ago, she'd slammed the doors to her chambers shut, and now she could finally breathe. The girl stated that she wanted her reward for the quest. The system announced that the sun, risen from death, was bestowing its first blessing upon the user who had become its saint. Ordell was stoked about the increase in her holy power. She'd felt a little of it before, and it felt like sunlight. The system informed our hero that her current holy power level was 5%, and for that, Ordell was getting a new skill. From now on, she could use holy power to buff her body, or specific parts of it. There was a note saying that if the user's base physical strength was too low, there might be limitations on using the skill. She brushed it off, relieved that she wouldn't need some insane grind like in her past life. She'd seriously regret that later. The high priest called the girl by name, asking if she was feeling a little more like herself. Eirik chimed in, saying he was scared out of his mind when Ordell suddenly collapsed, so he really needed to know how she was doing. At first, the girl couldn't figure out where she was. Then she remembered passing out from exhaustion. She mentioned she was a little dizzy, but she was okay now, then asked where Kento was. Eirik replied sternly and sharply that the guy was in lockup. There was an investigation going on to see if any of the kitchen staff or servants helped Kento inside the temple. The girl thought to herself that it was already dawn, and if investigation wasn't just a fancy word for torture. She remembered that at the end of the original story, when the saint was being tortured, Eirik's interrogation skills were off the charts. Ordell asked them not to be too rough with the investigation, because until the truth comes out, everyone in the temple is a friend. The priest thought to himself that the saint was acting weird again, saying things she normally wouldn't, but he agreed to her request anyway. Then he asked if anything was bothering her, explaining that he'd been watching her all night and there hadn't been any major issues. The heroine was stunned that he'd taken care of her all night. Ordell figured the priest would start interrogating her the second she woke up. But even in this situation, he's worried about her first? That's actually kinda sweet. She noticed she wasn't badly hurt, but she seemed to have tweaked her finger a little, probably from that flick. The priest said it could be healed, but in the future the saint shouldn't act like that. He gently took her hand, and added that she shouldn't interfere or put herself in danger, because the saint is super important to the main temple. The girl thought to herself that his kind words and gentle aura were so warm, and that this was the healing power she needed right now. Suddenly, the saint's middle finger lit up. The high priest announced that it was done. Then she asked how much money was found in the kitchen. Eirik replied that they found 9 gold and 87 silver. The girl wondered how to best use the money. The system revealed that 87 silver was equal to 1 gold, so about 10 gold coins total. The girl figured if she donated them all, her holy power would get a serious boost. They explained that 1 gold coin increases holy power by 0.1% and is worth 100,000 won. Ordell did the math and realized with a shock that reaching full holy power would take 10 billion. The priest asked her what that hand gesture meant. The girl replied it was nothing, she was just ticked off at the head chef. The priest said since they were on the subject of the kitchen incident, he wanted to know how the saint found out about Kento's embezzlement and the secret location. Ordell laughed nervously, thinking this priest was a real pain, but she couldn't exactly say she knew because she'd read the whole damn book. Flustered, she started stammering, saying it was a complete fluke. To herself, she thought that was the only way he'd buy it. He wasn't gonna grill a saint, was he? The high priest, skeptical and disbelieving, asked again if it was really just a coincidence. Ordell started enthusiastically backpedaling, claiming she had amazing intuition and sometimes got these flashes of insight. She figured it was divine intervention, but that explanation totally threw the priest for a loop. To herself, the girl thought her lies had left the priest speechless. She'd explain it all someday. She added mentally that her own investigation wasn't over and she still had things to do. Later that night, Kento was rummaging around in the kitchen. He was trying to get the last bag of cash out, but it was stuck. The guy was cursing up a storm, pissed he had to do this. He was filled with hate for that sassy little girl who'd been helping him steal all along and now dared to accuse him in front of the high priest. The only reason he put up with it was because when that Holy Knight commander showed up, he was toast. He realized he only had until tonight and needed to grab the rest and get out of here fast. Just then, Kento heard his name and someone asked if he'd found all his money. The guy screamed, totally freaked out, that there was a ghost. Ordell said it was kinda hurtful being mistaken for some kind of spook, but then Kento squinted and realized with horror it was the saint. Ordell explained that Kento wasn't the only spy in the temple, so she knew ahead of time the guy would bust out of jail and come back for the money. She thought to herself that she had years of experience lying in wait, and besides, criminals always return to the scene of the crime. Sarcastically, she thanked Kento for doing such a great job hauling all the cash out. She clarified that she didn't know exactly where all the stolen funds were hidden, and she needed to conserve her strength anyway. The guy said he wanted to see the saint before he left anyway, so it all worked out, then asked if she knew who he was taking orders from. He sneered, asking how a low-down fake dared interfere with Count Brick's business, and demanded she get on her knees and beg for forgiveness. A notification popped up that Ordell had activated her body enhancement skill, and she declared that whoever throws the first punch wins the fight. She jumped the guy, fists flying, asking who the heck he thought he was, ordering her to kneel. "Damn it," she snapped. "Guess I didn't hit hard enough that time." Kento, freaking out, yelled, "I'm not falling for that crap again." The guy, totally enraged, grabbed a knife from the table and snarled, "Well, if that's how it is, I'm taking your sorry head to Count Kiri's." Kento was hoping the Count would forgive him then, and he charged at the heroine like a madman. Ordell thought to herself, "This dude's completely lost it." She realized in horror she couldn't dodge the attack. The psycho with the knife was way too close. Scared stiff, she squeezed her eyes shut and screamed, hearing a bunch of noise and the clash of metal. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw Kento, shaking like a leaf and cowering in the corner. Ordell found herself in the arms of a handsome young guy. Turns out it was Seth Noyan, the commander of the Holy Knights from the main Sun God Temple, who just showed up out of nowhere. The young man asked anxiously if she was okay and if she was hurt. Stunned, Ordell stared at his silver hair and blue eyes. She couldn't believe it. Was this really Seth Noyan, the commander of the Holy Knights? In her mind, she was totally blown away by the second male lead's incredible good looks and aura. If the High Priest is Idell's shield, protecting our main girl, then the commander of the Holy Knights is her sword, punishing her enemies. Ordell was surprised to see him here, since she'd heard he was away on assignment as Seth walked up to Kento. He asked, all menacing, how this lowlife dared to steal in the sacred main temple, asking if he had a death wish. Without waiting for an answer, the young man added that he'd definitely heard Kento was in jail. He coldly asked the scumbag how he got here. Ordell was still starstruck because she hadn't expected to see the commander of the Holy Knights here. Seeing that her plan to handle this solo wasn't working, she thought with resignation that she needed to change the plan and tell him everything. She started yelling at the commander of the Holy Knights that this wasn't all of it, and that this criminal was just taking stolen money from another spot. She stated that besides what had been found, he'd hidden even more money, and these silver coins were proof of that. Kento suddenly started yelling, telling the Holy Knight commander not to believe a word she said, claiming the woman was hiding something. She fired back, saying you can't trust a scumbag like him, and insisted on a full-blown interrogation, right now. Kento, shaking with fear, stammered a question, while the heroine thought triumphantly that he probably thought he could get out of this by revealing that she was a fake saint, but no such luck. Seth Noyan, staring coldly at Kento, said that as a special act of grace, he was giving him a choice, and he laid out the terms clearly. Either Kento confesses where all the stolen money is and gets to keep his miserable life, or he loses it right here, right now. After a short pause, a broken Kento, trembling with fear, said he gave up and promised to tell everything. A little while later, the High Priest peeked into the kitchen because he'd been told the Holy Knight commander had arrived. But he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Kento, then asked in surprise why the saint was here. For a second, the Holy Knight commander froze in shock. He looked at the girl, surprised, and asked incredulously if he'd heard right, did the priest just call her a saint? When Seth was carrying Ordell, she said, with a hint of hurt, that she didn't think the commander wouldn't recognize her. The young man apologized, explaining that she looked like a completely different person. To which she sarcastically thought, the last thing I need is for him to compare me to a ghost. When he set her down, she first thanked Seth for his help. And then she started explaining that she was so scared after the awful incident that she lost all her strength. In her mind, she was fuming that she almost fainted again, wishing the system would give her back her old, healthy body. The High Priest was confused by what happened, stating that Kento had escaped from prison and was caught with the stolen money again. He was also wondering why the Saintess was in the kitchen, demanding someone explain what was going on there. The heroine explained that she actually knew Kento would come again and wanted to catch him. She emphasized that Kento wasn't just a simple thief, but a spy sent by Count Kiri's. Ordell said when she got back to the estate this time, she accidentally overheard the Earl and his aide talking about Kento. Then she got to the main point, saying there were rumors of more spies, though she didn't know who or how many. The saint suggested sealing off the entire temple immediately and finding them inwardly regretting that she knew nothing about the other spies. After all, that wasn't mentioned in the original story, and she'd have to deal with it with these two. Seth said he understood the main task. And Eric asked the reasonable question of why the saint hadn't said anything about this until now. She thought to herself that she needed to really deceive them right now. The heroine began to explain that, honestly, she'd been doubting the whole time whether to tell the temple about it or keep her father's secret. The girl said that when she returned to the main temple, she saw with her own eyes how different everything looked. She was overcome with guilt for the luxury she indulged in, not knowing that someone else was stealing money. Because of this theft, this place was suffering. It all became obvious to her. Including the impoverished temple and the suffering children, the saint said in a trembling voice that she felt very guilty towards the inhabitants of the temple, and she wants to apologize for what she did, promising to atone and put the main temple above all else from now on. When the high priest asked why she hadn't done this sooner, she claimed there wasn't any solid proof. She explained she was going to report it when she caught them red-handed, but didn't expect the commander of the Holy Knights to show up. Then Ordell asked hopefully if the priest and commander now believed she genuinely wanted to change for the main temple. Stepping into the hallway, Seth Noen mused that he hadn't seen the saint often before, but she seemed to have changed a lot while he was gone. Eirik suggested that the saint had a major change of heart after her recent trip to the Earl's estate. He added that her personality really had shifted, then turned to Seth, suggesting they find the remaining spies while they still could. The commander of the Holy Knights agreed and declared he'd immediately issue a lockdown order and check everyone who lived there. The high priest asked them to check everything thoroughly, but to try not to scare the kids, and Seth Noen replied that he understood, and Eirik volunteered to interrogate Kento, promising to get a confession out of him. The next morning, Seth caught a whiff of blood and asked the high priest about it. Seth was surprised, wondering if Eirik had spent all night in the dungeon. Eirik replied that he'd tried to clean up as best he could, but the smell apparently lingered. The commander of the Holy Knights pointed out that a normal person probably wouldn't notice, but others in the room might pick up on it. He advised the priest to open the windows as soon as he went to the living room. Luckily, the holy woman takes forever to get ready. But Eirik countered that she wasn't dressing up anymore since she'd ordered all her dresses to be gotten rid of. The high priest pondered her suspicious behavior and apologies for everything she'd done. Especially stuck in Eric's head was the holy woman's question: did they even slightly believe she could change? He concluded that it all seemed genuine because if she still had feelings for the Count, she wouldn't have exposed his spy. And she probably didn't say anything sooner because there still wasn't any trust between them. Eirik decided that if she was really determined to change, then he needed to change too. The maid ran up to the high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights, screaming that something terrible had happened. She explained that no matter how much she knocked on the saint's door, there was no answer, so she opened it, but the saint was nowhere to be found. The high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights exclaimed in shock and asked if the maid was serious. The personal assistant rushed into the master's office and joyfully announced that the location of what they had been searching for so long had finally been discovered. The master eagerly asked for more details. The servant reported that it was the very place where the sacred artifact of light was located. He clarified that the artifact was in a temple located in the northwest of the empire. The young man wondered if there was also a temple in the northwest. The subordinate explained that he himself only learned about this temple during the investigation. Apparently, it was almost completely abandoned. And it's completely unclear which god is worshipped there. The young man noted with indignation and annoyance that no matter how much he searched, he couldn't find it. The milord griped he had no clue there was a temple in this backwater, then added that he was sick to death of this tobacco. He ordered his assistant to get everything prepped and to move out, pronto. He thought to himself that this was his last shot at shaking off the misery that had been dogging him his whole life. The young man wanted that sacred artifact of light, no matter what it took. The saintess was majorly ticked off about her weak body and feeling so crummy. She was seriously pissed because she'd only been walking for, like, a minute, but felt like she was about to kick the bucket. The girl exclaimed in despair how fragile this body was and declared she absolutely couldn't keep going like this. So Ordell plopped down on the ground, totally wiped, and blamed the system for turning her into a freaking glass cannon. She was outraged how the original Ordell managed to pull off all those evil deeds in such a pathetic body, and the girl felt super nauseous. A flock of crows was already gathering over the exhausted girl, but she mustered her last bit of strength and yelled that they wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing her actually die. She figured she might be kicking the bucket soon, and her second life would end just like that, for nothing. The high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights were passing by when they heard the holy woman's whining and cussing. Right then, they called out her name and asked what the heck she was doing there. Ordell, with tears in her eyes, turned to the high priest and the commander and whined that she was completely out of juice. The young guys helped the holy woman get over to a bench. The girl thanked them, saying that if it weren't for them, she probably would have croaked during this workout. The high priest asked, totally baffled, what kind of killer workout was this anyway? Ordell felt embarrassed to answer, since it was just a 1-minute power walk. She apologized for making them come all the way out here. Seth said that he and the high priest were seriously freaked out when they found out the holy woman had suddenly vanished. Ordell smirked and guessed they just figured she'd bolted. She announced that from now on she's training from 6 to 7. The commander acknowledged, said he understood, and would provide security at that time. The saint refused protection, saying it was just light training. She said there was no danger since no one ever comes to their temple anyway. The commander glumly agreed. Ordell stated that her protection was far less important than the spy problem and inquired how things were going with that. Eirik reported that the deputy commander was currently dealing with the Holy Knights, and Priest Dietrich was handling the priest's issues. After questioning Kento, they managed to get a few names, but they planned to do a cross-check to be absolutely sure. Seth, with a heavy tone, added that among those Kento named were some of his own subordinates. The young man declared that if their involvement turns out to be true, he'll willingly accept punishment and step down from all his authority. Ordell mentally fumed, wondering where the commander was going, leaving the saint, whose holy power is only at 5%. She asked if not the commander of the Holy Knights. Then who could be trusted, and suggested he pretend she didn't hear his last words. The girl asked him to put aside those crazy thoughts in such a difficult situation and reliably protect this place. The commander swore to protect the saint and the temple. Ordell knew Set originally defended the fake Messiah Ordell to the very end. But after her unmasking, he was horrified and had to raise his sword against her. That was the most memorable scene in the novel. The saint asked the high priest to step aside for a minute for a private chat, then declared she was counting on him, now and in the future. And she inquired if Set still didn't know that the saint was a phony. After getting a no from Eric, she said she'd prefer the commander remain in the dark for now, though he'd inevitably learn the truth someday. Ordell announced her intention to officially retract her earlier statement about planning to leave the main temple. Before, she couldn't connect with the temple, since she thought she'd been exiled here because her family rejected her, but now she intends to serve diligently as the saint. The girl added that if a real saint shows up later, she'll immediately give up her position without hesitation. The high priest, after listening to her, declared that from the moment she entered the main temple as the saint, she became truly one. Since the saint is the highest authority in the main temple, she doesn't need his permission for anything. He promised to take full responsibility, since he was the one who brought her here in the first place, so the saintess is free to do whatever she thinks is right. The heroine was totally shocked, wondering how these people could treat her this way. After all, the Ordell from the original novel had always ignored them, looked down on them, and humiliated them. The girl made a firm decision that she was going to work really hard to change. Because if she's surrounded by such kind and loyal people, maybe this second life isn't so bad after all. The next morning, Ordell was furious at her own weakness. Her physical strength was only 0.0204%. The system reported a tiny increase, 1/1,000,000%. The heroine dreamed of the day she could run 50 yards without getting winded. Suddenly, an agitated maid appeared, apologizing 1,000 times for disturbing her. The heroine thought with annoyance that she really needed to deal with the servants' panic problem whenever they saw her. The maid reported that someone was outside to see the saintess, claiming to have a message from Count Kiris. Hearing Count Kiris's name, the heroine thought that now that the spies were dealt with, she'd been waiting for him to finally show his face. She breathed a sigh of relief, figuring she could finally cut out this cancer, then headed to the front door. The uninvited guest was raising hell, demanding how they dared block his path, knowing who he was. The guy was demanding they let him in right now, threatening to teach the servants some manners if they weren't properly trained. He was yelling that he wouldn't let it slide, and the guards and servants were trying to calm him down, but clearly failing, since one of the maids was on the floor crying. Ordell walked closer and asked, "What the heck is going on here?" The rowdy guest stopped fighting with the guards, cheerfully greeted Lady Kiris, and said he was glad she finally arrived. To herself, the saint was furious, saying she'd never heard such disrespect, and called the guest a cocky jerk, threatening to wipe the floor with him. The visitor kept complaining, saying the temple clearly wasn't doing a good job training its underlings. The man suggested Lady Kiri's start training them properly from today on, because they shouldn't be acting like this in a temple built by Count Kiris. He kept demanding to be let in immediately. Then the saintess asked who this man was supposed to be. The man, introducing himself as Baron William Gale, was outraged that they wouldn't recognize the Earl's right-hand man. The novice wiped away her tears and said in a timid voice that this was Baron William Gale. The saintess thanked the girl. She paused, wondering if this man really did hit a child, and coldly replied that she couldn't possibly remember every little thing like that. She ordered the knights to take the injured novice and get her some help. Ordell added with contempt that someone around here could use some manners themselves. Then, turning to Baron Kale, she stated that such violence was unacceptable in the sacred main temple. The man reminded her that he was Baron Gale and explained that he said he was there on the Earl's orders, but they didn't recognize him and said he needed permission. The saintess coldly stated to Baron Gale that that was the main rule of this temple, then gave him a choice. Either he goes back right now, or he enters quietly. She added that if it were up to her, she'd have tossed his rude butt out already, but she's giving him one more chance. Later, in Ordell's room, the Knight Commander and High Priest were adamant that a private meeting was completely out of the question. Eirik explained that there was no telling what kind of damage this brute, who only knows how to throw punches, might cause. Seth added that this guy brought a dozen knights with him and emphasized that the saint needed to reconsider her decision to meet with him alone. Watching the scene unfold, Ordell thought to herself that they were both playing their parts surprisingly well. The girl recalled how, 10 minutes ago, she'd said that as soon as contact with the spy was lost, the Earl noticed and sent Baron Gale. She figured Gale would try to strong-arm her, using the donations as leverage, but they couldn't afford to clash with the Earl. After all, they were hurting for cash right now, so Ordell proposed a plan. Use the fact that the spies were exposed. Also, Eirik and Seth needed to pretend they absolutely couldn't leave the saint alone with Gale, and then, reluctantly give in and leave. Later, the girl noted to herself that the commander and high priest were a little too into their roles. Ordell said she had an important conversation and asked them to leave. The knight commander warned he'd leave the holy knights outside, ready to rush in if anything went down. Ordell thought with surprise that even meticulous Seth played his part so well. Once alone, Gale started threatening her, asking if Ordell Kiris had lost her mind. He yelled, asking what Lord Kiris would say if he knew how she was acting, but Ordell calmly said he'd probably be pissed. But then she countered that whoever ratted her out would be the one dealing with it, not her. She added that he seemed to think mentioning the Earl would make her beg and grovel. Ordell mused that, come to think of it, she'd been acting way too much like a pushover for no reason. She added sarcastically that it wasn't surprising, since she was a saint now, and the Baron, enraged, shouted, "How dare she?" The man reminded her that she was a fake saint, only in that position thanks to the Earl's favor, acting like this. Ordell calmly agreed and stated that even if it came out she was a fake saint, she'd be a little embarrassed, and that's it. Now, the consequences for Count Kiris are going to be way more serious. Ordell said she definitely hasn't forgotten the Count's kindness. She mentioned that she's enjoying this lavish life thanks to him, then announced she's going to play the role of the saint properly now. She straight up asked the Baron if he came because of the spy news and pointed out that she was the one who reported Chef Kento's embezzlement. Gale panicked and asked why she did that, saying that now that the High Priest and Holy Knight Commander know, planting a new spy will be tough. She said she worked hard and earned their trust, and that if she plays the saint role right, there won't be any need for new spies. The heroine declared that she'll become the spy herself, and ordered the Baron to go back and tell the Count to stop planting spies and just sit tight. Ordell stated that she'd bring him the real money herself. To herself, she admitted that was a total lie. Meanwhile, the High Priest and the Holy Knight Commander were discussing what happened. Seth pointed out that even though the living room has good soundproofing, if there's a loud scream, the Holy Knights are sure to hear it. The Holy Knight Commander thought they should assign a personal knight to the saint, since she's a real wild card. The High Priest agreed that would be best, and remarked that it looked like someone had come to the main temple. Eirik was right. A carriage did pull up to the main temple. A tall, dark-haired guy stepped out, and he definitely wasn't from the Kiri's family. Ordell was wrapping things up with Baron Gale and wasn't expecting another visitor. She asked the High Priest who the heck this guy was. Eirik pointed out that the saint's conversation with the Baron seemed to have gone well and introduced the guest, His Grace, Duke Ruta Shiori. He explained that the Duke is one of the 4 pillars holding up the Empire and the Lord of the West. Hearing that, Ordell thought with dread. Why is the final boss here? Why is he showing up so early? Right then, her system kicked in, bringing up the novel's content and searching for the relevant passages. They described the Duke as a soul lost in chaos and destruction, consumed by utter darkness. It said his gaze held no spark of light, only the abyss of doom. The Duke was despair incarnate. Root Shiori was the head of one of the Empire's 4 ducal houses, the only one without royal blood, but with absolute power. Originally, he was this cold-blooded, ruthless villain, always throwing wrenches into the gears of the main girl and her love interests. But his sheer attractiveness made him insanely popular. Ordell couldn't figure out what the heck he was even doing here. The Duke introduced himself politely, saying it was a pleasure to meet her. The Saint, steeling herself, did the same. Internally, she noted that up close, the guy was even more handsome. So the rumors about his popularity, despite being a total jerk, were probably true. The Duke said he was lucky to run into the Saint and explained that he was here on important business. He added that the matter was too sensitive to discuss in the hallway and asked if they could talk privately. The Duke suggested sending the Baron back and getting down to business ASAP, just the 2 of them. Ordell thought he really put the Baron in his place, and maybe he was someone she could actually work with. The Duke cut right to the chase, saying he came because he heard the main temple had the sacred artifact of light. Ordell was surprised that's what he was after, since Root had that artifact from the start and couldn't figure out why he was looking for it here. They were talking about the sacred relic of light, a key item in the novel, and the reason the Duke became the enemy of the main sun god temple. The young man was suffering from terrible pain, and nothing helped, but when he put on the sacred artifact of light, the pain subsided. So Root became dependent on the relic, but the sacred relic of light was a fake, able to bewitch a person. The dark energy trapped inside completely took over Root's mind, which led to his downfall, and that's how he turned into a villain. Ordell realized she needed to find the sacred relic of light first, then there'd be no villain, and she'd be safe. Suddenly, the high priest decided to chime in, saying the sacred relic of light was in the main temple. The girl was so shocked, she almost choked because if the relic was really here, it was the perfect opportunity. The Duke was pleased and said his trip wasn't a waste and asked them to hand over the sacred relic. In exchange, he promised to grant any wish if Ordell and the high priest agreed. Eirik politely but firmly replied that handing over the relic, even to him, the Duke, was impossible since it was a precious relic of the temple. The heroine apologized, saying they couldn't just give away the relic, but the Duke insisted, asking if there wasn't any way at all. He stated that the Shiori ducal family was well known to the high priest and the saint, and suggested simply borrowing the relic. The brunette emphasized that he wasn't asking to sell or give away the relic, but only to borrow it, and promised to do anything for the temple. He also stated that he was ready to fulfill any conditions and asked them to think it over again. Internally, Ordell decided that a great plan would be not to give away the relic, but to squeeze as much money as possible out of Ruth. Outwardly, she replied that since the Duke was saying this, it was hard for them to refuse. The high priest asked in surprise what the saint was talking about. Ordell explained that even to a Duke who wasn't a follower, they couldn't just hand over the relic. She noted that the conversation could only continue if he first registered as a follower. Naturally, the Duke was taken aback, but the saint assured him they wouldn't be a burden. Just a few small donations would do. In the heroine's mind, it was perfect. The Duke would become a follower, just give money, and they'd borrow what he wanted. Ordell said the terms were simple enough, Root agreed, and the saint ordered the chapel's register of parishioners to be prepared. The Duke swore an oath to the sun god, promising to be a faithful servant, to be warm as the sun and burn like fire, glorifying him everywhere. After that, the heroine got a notification that a new follower, Ruta Shiori, was registered. In the special notes, it said he was a future troublemaker. Following that, Ordell received a message that her divine power had increased by 8% for such a follower. Ordell was ecstatic, saying it was insane, because her divine power had risen by a whole 3% for one follower. Admiring the value of such a follower, she enthusiastically welcomed him to his new status, declaring that she appreciated him greatly. Then the girl got down to business, asking if the follower would now talk about the fee for the relic, and the Duke agreed. He offered around 500 gold to start, and the heroine froze in shock. Noticing her silence, the guy asked if that wasn't enough. Then he doubled the offer, and the heroine happily exclaimed that double was perfect. Right then, she got confirmation that when her divine power hit 10%, a super important skill would unlock. The girl guessed the skill would unlock the same way she got the body enhancement skill when she hit 5%. Cutting off the talk about money, she seriously suggested to the Duke that they speak privately. After closing the doors behind them, Ordell declared she had an offer to make to his lordship. The Duke wondered with interest what the saint wanted to discuss privately, but Ordell just straight up demanded more money. Rout asked if he'd heard correctly. The girl clarified she didn't need much, just 2,000 gold would do. She added that it was best to do this in secret, away from the high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights. Then the saint got to the point, asking if it was true that the reason the Duke needed the relic was because of an illness. The heroine explained that this had been bothering her ever since they met in the hallway, because she noticed strange marks on his body. Since he was suffering from an incurable disease in the original story, she figured the dark, sometimes golden marks were definitely related to his illness. He was stunned, saying no one had ever mentioned the marks. He asked how she knew about them. Ordell pointed out that she might see them because she's a saint from the sun god's temple, specializing in healing power. She added that the level of pain seems to change depending on the marks, suggesting they're a manifestation of the Duke's illness. Then she declared that even the sacred relic of light wouldn't be able to fully cure the Duke's disease. Ordell assured him that she would offer her help, and things would change, but she just needed exactly 2,000 gold. The Duke, with a hint of irony, asked why he felt like he was being robbed by some thug, and so the Duke handed Ordell 2,000 gold. Receiving the money, Ordell was so thrilled she thought she could hear music playing in her ears. She dropped 2,000 gold pieces into the donation box. A notification popped up. Thanks to the devotion of a loyal follower, the sun risen from death has recovered some of its power. Ordell's current divine power has reached 10%, and she's unlocked an exclusive skill, Blessing. The skill includes healing through blessing and the ability to apply a blessing to objects. Ordell recognized the skill. Remembering Eric using it on her last time, she figured it'd definitely come in handy. The girl mentally thanked the sun god for the support. After all, she'd only recently decided to live right, fulfilling her duties, and already she's become a saint capable of bestowing blessings. She turned to the precious Root Shiori, suggesting they hurry up and go find the sacred relic. Root started to worry if he'd been played for a fool. He thought the saint was weird, especially given her state, like she was drunk on gold. Ordell set off to find the sacred relic. Together with the commander of the Holy Knights, the saint descended the stairs. She descended beneath the temple and was stunned to discover a mysterious place, thinking it wasn't called holy ground for nothing. The girl noted that this place maintained its appearance even without special care. Seth said it had been directly touched by the hand of God. However, he didn't know the relic's exact location, as the high priest was in charge of this place. The girl regretted that Eric wasn't with them right now, but then remembered tasking him with counting the money for the holy relic transfer. She knew she couldn't give the real relic to Ruth, so she planned to swap it out with something else. The girl also realized that if she went looking for the relic with Eric and carried out her plan, she'd face resistance. So, none of them knew where the sacred relic was located. Ordell thought with relief that it was a good thing she had the system. The girl got directions from the system and declared that her saintly intuition told her they needed to go that way. She asked the commander to follow her. And so, after some time, they stood before something that looked a whole lot like the sacred relic. The commander sounded doubtful, saying it was probably something else, not a holy relic. Ordell agreed, guessing it looked more like a relic of darkness than one of the sun god. Seth was shocked, saying that couldn't be, since the previous high priest personally made it. Ordell offered two possibilities: either he was a traitor, or he never truly believed in the sun god to begin with. Her thoughts turned to the creator of the holy relic. He was born with the sun god's divine power, but betrayed him and started worshipping his enemy. As payment for his devotion, he received power and created the holy relic. The girl also remembered that the sun god's enemy was the ultimate evil in the novel, and the final boss the main character had to fight. She concluded that if Ruth was exposed to this evil, he'd become a villain, just like in the original story. So, a relic like this had to be destroyed beforehand, and that's when her body enhancement skill activated. The heroine clenched her fists, a cracking sound echoed, and Seth exclaimed, "What in the world are you doing, Holy One?" The Holy Knight commander was floored. He couldn't believe the sacred relic broke that easily. The commander voiced his concern, reminding them they already agreed to the exchange. Plus, they already got paid for it. Seth asked what the heck they were gonna do now. Ordell pointed out the Duke probably doesn't know what the sacred relic even looks like, and asked if they really had to give that one. Then she turned to the Holy Knight commander, asking if he knew of any sacred relics deeply connected to healing. The girl explained that healing is a seriously powerful ability, and there aren't any sacred relics in the temple with that kind of juice, except for divine artifacts, made by the gods and passed down to humans. But sacred relics are made by humans with divine power, the heroine pointed out, gesturing to the Aurora artifact, which even looked different. Ordell remembered that in the original story, Aurora was a healing artifact. Ordell realized she could use it to stop Root's pain and maybe even block the power of absolute evil. She had this crazy ambitious plan: turn a future enemy into an ally using the divine Aurora artifact. The Holy Knight's commander tried to object, but Ordell confidently cut him off, saying that Seth would understand her choice someday and that she'd tell the High Priest herself. A system notification popped up saying that user Ordell had come into contact with the divine Aurora artifact. It suggested using the blessing skill on the artifact, and the heroine mentally begged Aurora to relieve Root's suffering. So, after a while, Ordell brought the Duke the artifact and pointed out that it was the very item he'd been so eager to get his hands on. Then she added that it also had her blessing imbued in it, and a saint's blessing is pretty damn valuable. The young man was wary of the relic at first, but after a couple of seconds, he finally picked it up and immediately hit the floor in agony. Looks like those dark spots were reacting to the divine Aurora artifact. Ordell reassured him, telling him it was okay and begged him not to be afraid, to breathe slowly and deeply. She noticed the black spots were shrinking a little, and the Aurora artifact was doing its job. She told him sternly to not let go of the sacred relic, no matter what. Suddenly, the Duke felt a lot better. He was stunned and said the pain was gone. Ordell smiled and congratulated Ruta Shiori, and she pointed out that now the Duke wouldn't have to keep searching for other solutions. He said that no matter which grand temple he visited or what potion he drank, it didn't make a difference. The absence of pain was truly sweet. The Duke declared he didn't regret spending 2,000 gold one bit. Ordell smirked and said she was the kind of person who always earned her keep. He asked if she'd lived in the slums before becoming a saint, remarking that her money-making skills were unbelievable. The saint threatened to take the sacred relic back right then and there, but Root, laughing, quickly clarified that he was just kidding. After the pain vanished, he seemed cheerful and relaxed. The girl figured this was probably Ruta's real personality. She added that the reason the holy relic worked so well was because of her blessing. He asked if that meant he had her to thank for everything. Ordell agreed, clarifying that her blessing only lasts a month. The system notified the heroine that the Aurora Divine Artifact's blessing would last 30 days. It explained that the user's divine power wasn't currently strong enough to grant a permanent blessing. The saint explained that to maintain the current effect, her dear follower needed a new blessing every month. She wondered if the Duke knew there was a separate fee for re-blessing, and added that he shouldn't forget to bring a donation with each visit. He sarcastically replied that even if she ended up on a desert island, there'd be no need to worry about her. He remarked that he also tries not to waste time, but the saint had already squeezed him dry and wasn't about to stop. She asked if the master wasn't going to pay up anymore, reminding him there was no turning back. He said he would, but he worried that if he ran out of cash, he'd be useless. Ordell bluntly stated that was obvious, 'cause a broke duke ain't good for nobody. The young man said he always figured his pretty face was good for something. The girl thought to herself that Duke Shiori was so damn handsome, there was no arguing with that. Noticing she didn't disagree, the young man took it as agreement. Then the saint said there was something else. She added that talk about his illness and her blessing had to stay on the down low, and asked him not to spill the beans to the high priest or the commander of the Holy Knights, explaining that if they started asking how she knew about his sickness, it'd just be a major headache. The girl pointed out that a saint's blessing contains healing power, and since the Duke received a sacred relic, figuring out his illness wasn't exactly rocket science. Root figured it was in his best interest to keep it from Eric and Seth, 'cause the fewer people who knew about his condition, the better. The Duke was unnerved by the saint's youthful face, barely 20 it seemed, and the unusual aura that didn't match her age. He figured she was a woman of her word, but Root had seen plenty swear loyalty, then stab you in the back. He decided he needed to learn more about the Kiri's family, the saint, and the Grand Temple, but aloud he said he agreed. The dark-haired man pointed out there was no need to broadcast his weaknesses, so this would be their little secret. At that moment, the Duke glanced at Ordell and thought that with a saint of the sun god's temple like her, the future was shaping up to be a whole lot more interesting. A little while later, the high priest was freaking out. He discovered that while he was counting the donation money, the saint had handed over a sacred artifact to the Duke. That news made Eric faint dead away, but the saint just said things weren't that bad, and there was no need to overreact, especially since the Duke was already gone, so there was nothing to be done about it. Eric asked the saint why she'd given away the sacred artifact. The saint said she figured the Duke needed it more than some dusty old holy relic. Her reasoning was, if the sacred artifact's locked away in the sanctuary, the main temple ain't gonna get any buzz. I mean, gold ain't gonna rain from the sky, but if word gets out that Duke Shiori's become a follower of the sun god, then the main temple's gonna be packed, and maybe even get more believers, since the Duke promised to visit the temple every month. The high priest's eyes went wide like saucers. Eric asked, "That busy Duke promised that?" She confirmed it. Yeah, he promised to swing by and check on the sacred artifact all the time. The girl added that the Duke doesn't even know it's a sacred artifact, and luckily he had no idea what the Holy Relic of Light looked like. The high priest asked what happened to the Holy Relic of Light. Ordell replied that she just pressed on it a little and it crumbled. Eric admitted that, honestly, unlike the other sacred relics, that one always gave him a bad vibe. He figured if the relic crumbled that easily, maybe it wasn't the real deal. Then Ordell asked, with a hint of accusation, if the priest was still planning on handing that shady thing over to the Duke after all this. The high priest started backpedaling, saying he never intended to do that. The heroine knew that in the original story, Root, even before he fully turned evil, seemed to hate the sun god more than anything. The question came up about what to do with the shattered holy relic, and it was pointed out that putting it back in the sanctuary was kind of a bad idea. The heroine declared that she'd handle the issue herself. Count Kiri scoffed, asking if Ordell was seriously going to play the saint. Baron William Gale pointed out that Ordell had won the trust of the high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights. The Count reminded everyone that this kid even faked her own death and mentioned she'd pull any stunt to get attention. He concluded that her words couldn't be trusted, but the Baron countered that the main problem wasn't Ordell, but the fact that Duke Shiori had visited the main temple. The Baron didn't know the reason for the visit and suggested asking Ordell, figuring that if she was really going to be a spy, she'd answer. The Count said, "We don't know how much intel the High Priest'll let the fake saint get her hands on, but it's worth a shot." He ordered the message sent ASAP, and the Baron replied it'd be sent right away. The Count noted a big fish took the bait out of nowhere, and we gotta get this news to the boss ASAP. He's super interested in what's going down today. Meanwhile, the heroine activated her blessing skill because the sacred relic of light couldn't hold its form anymore and was on the verge of vanishing. Ordell exclaimed happily that was awesome, because whoever made the fake relic was beefing with the sun god. So she figured she could destroy it with her blessing skill, packed with the sun god's energy. She confirmed, satisfied, that her hunch was right. However, the system announced that destroying the divine artifact had failed. Because the user's current holy power isn't enough to destroy a divine artifact. Ordell was shocked it was a divine artifact, or rather a box made in the depths of the sea. The heroine guessed it wasn't made by the main boss, and not by the sun god either. And she was like, how come nobody knew about a divine artifact this powerful? Plus, it was crazy durable. She didn't want to just put stuff in it. Ordell joked that if a killer showed up, she'd use it as a weapon. The main temple of the sun god was having a straight-up meat fest for the first time ever. Ordell threw the whole party. Everyone there was saying how freaking delicious it was. One of the maids even teared up, saying it had been ages since she'd had meat. Another maid happily and gratefully pointed out that it was all thanks to the saint. Ordell was feeling good, but then she glanced at the high priest and got annoyed. Who even eats meat like that? She said it was no wonder Eric was always feeling weak, nibbling and picking like a bunny eating grass. The high priest started to defend himself, saying he didn't always faint. Ordell insisted he eat more, promising to bring him all the meat he could handle. Then Seth called out to the saintess and introduced her to a woman named Victoria Lawrence, a holy knight from the main temple of the sun god. The commander of the Holy Knights declared that from now on, she would be the saintess's personal knight. The saintess noted to herself that Victoria looked very stern and said she didn't need a personal knight. However, the commander of the Holy Knights objected, asking what if another jerk like that Baron Gale showed up again. He added that as commander, he couldn't allow something like that to happen again. After thinking for a moment, the saintess agreed. The saintess invited the commander of the Holy Knights and the Knight Victoria to sit down and start eating, assuring them there was plenty of meat for everyone. She happily noted that Priest Dietrich had chosen good ingredients, so even just plain roasted meat tasted delicious. Meanwhile, Dietrich had the thought that he should buy more food, since there was only roasted meat on the table. He thought that he needed to find a new chef quickly and get the cafeteria running smoothly, but doubted the temple could afford the staff's salaries. Since a chef is a highly skilled specialist, Ordal had exactly the same thought and decided to work hard to save money in every way possible. One of the nuns was giving the saint a look, all sad and jealous for some reason. The heroine was chilling on her bed, totally blissed out 'cause she'd just stuffed her face. She got a little bummed remembering how people always say she's got a weak constitution, 'cause she gets full so easily. Just then, Knight Victoria knocked on the door. She announced that Sister Monica Hindle wanted to see her and asked if she should let her in. The saint didn't immediately place the name, but then it hit her. That's the original heroine, Idella's best friend. Grinning, she told her to send her in. Monica apologized for bothering her so late and explained that the saint looked super busy during the day, so she took a chance and came now to ask her something. The saint confirmed she was busy getting ready for the party and asked how she liked the food. Monica gushed that it was the first decent meal she'd had since she got there and thanked the saint again. Ordal modestly replied that she didn't organize it alone, but was glad Monica liked it. To herself, she thought Monica Hindle was cuter than the original description and wondered how old she was. Just then, the system informed the heroine that Monica was 18 years old. Ordal thought to herself that Monica was only half her age from her past life and that it was the most wonderful age. The heroine felt some strange inner connection, probably because she'd seen Monica in the original story. She asked what business Monica had with her, and Monica, stuttering a little, asked to become her personal maid. Not only the saintess was shocked, but also the cold, emotionless Victoria, who happened to witness the dialogue. Ordal asked in surprise what she was talking about, and doubted if the young lady would be able to handle it well. Monica insisted that she was considered quite promising among the novices and that she wanted to learn a lot from the saintess. The saintess, in turn, replied that her abilities were quite modest, so it would be difficult for Monica to learn anything from her. Monica started protesting, begging the saint not to talk like that, saying she'd be happy just to serve her. Finally, the saint agreed, calling her by name, and Monica gratefully replied that she would try her best. The personal maid's first request was for the saint to speak to her more casually, and the Knight Victoria seconded that. The saint surprisingly agreed, and Monica noted to herself that the saint was even more beautiful up close. She remembered the time she got slapped for blocking the Earl's vassals, and how the saint totally put him in his place in front of everyone. The saint didn't just do that, but she also worried about her so sweetly. Monica said she was super stoked that she'd get to see the saint all the time, starting tomorrow. The next day, bright and early, Ordal was complaining she was gonna hurl, saying all that meat she ate yesterday felt like it was about to come back up. Victoria, looking annoyed, suggested she take a short break and then get back to training. The young maid ran up to the lady, asked if she was okay, and offered her some water. The saint thanked her. And she pointed out that they didn't need to be following her around from the crack of dawn, but Victoria and Monica refused in unison. The girls insisted they were obligated to perform their duties diligently, and Ordal sarcastically congratulated them on their teamwork. Then Monica brought Saint a letter from Count Kiris that had arrived early that morning. Saint was surprised that the Kiris family had decided to remember their heiress. The letter was even longer than 10 lines. The Count wanted to know the real reason Duke Shiori was visiting the main temple. Ordal understood that Count Kiris was testing her loyalty. She flat out called the Count garbage. Naturally, such blunt words shocked Monica and Victoria. The young maid, already filled with hatred for the Count, happily supported her lady. Ordal declared that her goal was to completely eliminate the Count's influence, but until then, she'd keep squeezing money out of him. To answer the Count, she needed to mix truth and lies, saying that the Duke was searching for a sacred artifact and promised to visit the temple monthly. This should hide the heroine's true intentions to betray the Count's family. Then she asked about the situation in the Empire's potion market. Victoria, who was just outside the temple, explained that the market's split between the Sea God Temple's potions and alchemical potions. The Sea God Temple's got a lock on things thanks to their holy power potions, and they played dirty to keep it that way. Ordal confessed that she's planning to bring back potion production at the Sun God Temple, making hybrid potions that mix holy power and alchemy. That's gonna be her strategy to make the temple strong and independent. A few days later, at the Shiori family mansion, they were holding a fencing practice. And one of the guys there was the young Duke Shiori himself. His opponent tapped out, saying his lord's skills seemed to have gotten even better. Ruta shot back, asking if it wasn't just because the commander wasn't putting in enough work. The guy apologized and promised to train harder with his sword. The lord chuckled a little, saying no matter how much he trained, he still wouldn't measure up, but he could give it his best shot. The commander thought to himself that the master wasn't just training swordsmanship, but also the art of scaring the crap out of people with words. Root mentally noted the unusual lightness in his body and figured the effect of the sacred relic of light was seriously good stuff. Just then, a servant burst onto the training ground yelling that a letter had arrived. The master chewed him out for his reckless and noisy behavior, and the servant started making excuses, saying the master was being too harsh. He explained that the important thing was the letter was from the main temple of the sun god, and that news got the master's attention. The Duke told the servant to hold his weapon and started reading the letter from the main temple with interest, then handed the letter to the servant so he could read it too. The letter skipped the pleasantries and got straight to the point. The holy woman was letting him know they were planning to start potion production at the temple. It said the temple had decided to bring in the Duke's trading company for this, since they were short on manpower, and they were planning to hire alchemists. She described it as a collaboration between holy power and alchemy, and said she hoped it intrigued him because she was counting on him going forward. The Duke remarked that the holy woman was really something else and always got straight to business without any fluff, and the servant agreed it was a pretty sweet deal. Especially considering this temple's never collaborated before, so it's a fresh angle. My guy mentioned the Sun God Temple's potions used to be legendary for their effectiveness. Bringing them back could seriously mess with the main Sea God Temple. Just thinking about them brings back bad memories for the Duke. They didn't just fail to cure him, they couldn't even ease the symptoms, and those saints were insufferable jerks. "So what's the dirt on this Count Kiris guy?" the Duke asked. The servant reported that the saint was originally from a minor branch of the Count's family, but after showing powers, the Count himself adopted her. That boosted the family's status, but the saint herself was despised in the house. The servants ignored her, and during visits to the estate, she was subjected to some really rough treatment, close to abuse before being kicked out. Rumor has it they deliberately messed with her aura to humiliate her, but the Duke pointed out that she didn't seem broken. And with a smirk, he admitted he almost fell for her charms. Then, out of the blue, he announced a visit to the main temple. To his servant's shocked question, the Duke explained, "Since the saintess is asking for help in writing, it's only polite to offer it." Over tea, the saintess explained her plan to revive potion production at the sun god's temple. She admitted that the market for commoners was already taken by alchemical potions, and the market for nobles was dominated by the sea god's main temple. Even though the sun god's temple's potions were famous before the temple's authority declined, starting over won't be easy. The heroine remembered that in the original story, Idella revived potion production thanks to her overwhelming holy power, but that's not possible with her current holy power. Ordell emphasized that she can't rely on the Earls and Roots money forever. Her plan is to hire alchemists who couldn't belong to any group and branched off on their own, but still have good skills. She pointed out that there's no law forbidding alchemists from becoming believers. They can increase the number of priests and get the business going, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The girl said it would be great to get into this business, since healing potions were originally the pride of their temple. Then she announced that she'd already sent a letter to Duke Shiori, and that they'll be doing business with him together. Ordell was all confident, saying, "If they're offering him a cut, ain't no way the Duke's gonna refuse." Right when they were hashing out their potion-making plans, there was a knock at the door. It was the maid, announcing that Duke Shiori had unexpectedly arrived at the temple. The saintess didn't even believe it at first and asked again who was there. But at that very moment, the Duke walked in. He asked, with a touch of irony, if she'd been doing well all this time. The heroine wondered to herself if she was dreaming, and why this guy was suddenly here. The Duke, with a cocky smirk, asked if such a handsome dude had appeared before Ordell that she thought it was all a dream. The saintess, recovering from the shock, remarked that if he was talking nonsense, then it really was the Duke himself. And when she asked why he came so early, the Duke replied that since she sent a letter saying she missed him, he dropped everything and rushed over. Without missing a beat, the saint shot back that yeah, she missed something. All right, but it was his wallet, not him. The Duke told her to chill with the death stare, and she explained she'd been so busy today, she'd eaten breakfast and lunch in the carriage. So Ordell suggested they eat first, then talk. She figured a guy needs to be fed before he does anything. They decided meat was the way to go. So, slicing into his steak, the Duke circled back to the potion business proposal. He confirmed he was in on the partnership, but said her huge smile was kinda setting off alarm bells. She assured him it was just a smile expressing fondness for a business partner. But Root sarcastically guessed it was more like a fake, corporate smile, which she mentally acknowledged was spot on. The Saint laid out her plan. The temple would handle production, and the Duke would handle distribution. When he asked about alchemist salaries, which could bankrupt the temple, she explained she was planning on converting the alchemists to the faith. This'll let us house and feed 'em, cut their base pay a bit, but add a bonus system tied to sales. Her argument was, if production takes off, even a small percentage difference will mean huge profit gains. Ordell concluded she couldn't budge, but offered the Duke the job of sourcing ingredients and materials instead. She figured he knew some good suppliers, and she laid down the hard terms. The profit split had to be 8-2, obviously favoring the temple. The Duke was pissed and pushed for at least a 6-4 split, since he'd be handling distribution and getting the supplies. The Saint flat out said the split stays at 8-2. But, to sweeten the deal, she offered another condition, one the Duke couldn't refuse. The heroine declared she would completely cure the Duke's illness. She pointed out that her holy power keeps getting stronger, and the stronger it is, the stronger her blessings and healing become. She added that if things kept progressing like this, even though it would take time, she could completely cure Duke Shiori's illness. The Duke, skeptical, asked again if her power was actually getting stronger. Ordell admitted that she couldn't compare to the Saintess and Saint from the main sea god temple right now, but she hoped to surpass them someday. She added that if the Duke doubted her, there was nothing she could do, since she had no proof. Then the young man asked if the Saintess, if given the chance to cure his illness, would pretend she knew nothing, especially if he didn't agree to her terms and insisted on a 6-4 profit split. Internally, the girl berated herself for saying that, because no matter how blinded by money she was, there were things you just don't say. She admitted that using the treatment as a bargaining chip was her mistake and apologized. The Duke remarked that the Saintess, even having a weapon, wasn't trying to use it. She countered that not all weapons are the same, and a life-saving treatment shouldn't be used as a weapon. The Duke just grinned, said he understood, and offered a 7-3 split as a compromise. And he handed her a little something, a $3,000 down payment on the potion-making contract. Ordell was pleasantly surprised. She wasn't expecting a deposit, especially not that much. The heroine felt a pang of guilt, realizing she'd been trying to play around with such a decent guy's life. She vowed to herself that from now on, even if she had a weapon she could use, there's no way she'd use it. So, alchemists started showing up at the main temple of the sun god, throwing their hats in the ring. First up was 29-year-old Genric Ruan, a certified alchemy genius, unmatched when it came to creativity. Genric offered his services to tweak recipes and discover new ways to brew potions. His specialty was creating alchemical formulas, and he applied, intrigued by this new potion combining holy power and alchemy. The second alchemist was Wolfgang Schmidt. Ordell noted to herself how different they were in personality. The girl had her doubts about them working together, even though Wolfgang could nail the formulas and Genric could put them into practice. The Saint laid out the contract terms: work hours from 9 to 6, with room and board provided by the main temple. Overtime pay would be hourly, and they'd get a bonus every time they hit their sales targets. Both alchemists enthusiastically agreed to sign the contract, saying they never dreamed of landing a gig like this. The heroine mentally noted that the guys had serious skills, but they didn't fit in, were left on the sidelines, and were struggling financially. She concluded that people aren't motivated by pity or threats, but by money that recognizes their talent. Ordell announced that, as per the contract, they needed to register as believers, and the system indicated that her holy power increased by 0.01%. Then the Saint introduced Priestess Lana Ayla, who would be in charge of overall management at their sun god temple. She emphasized that holy power, not alchemy, was the key to the sun god potions, and therefore asked the alchemists to listen to Lana carefully. Priestess Lana awkwardly greeted her colleagues, which made Ordell doubt whether such a timid person could handle the leadership role. Still, Eric personally vouched for her, so the heroine tried to let go of her worries. She announced that the ingredient list had to go through Priestess Lana, and she'd do her best to get everything they needed. Everything had to be documented, and if anyone was caught using ingredients for anything other than work, it would be immediately docked from their pay. Ordell pointed out that Lana had powerful healing abilities and knew the potion recipes passed down through generations in the main temple. The heroine urged everyone to work together and create an awesome potion. A few days later, a serious conflict erupted between the alchemists, Genric and Wolfgang. Wolfgang scoffed, saying even a commoner knew that a mix of amine flowers and middle herb was a moneymaker. Genric argued passionately that if mixed right, it could make a fantastic potion, but the outcome could be even better. Wolfgang retorted that it needed research, and if they found the right ratio, it'd be legendary, and the argument quickly turned personal. Genric called Wolfgang a blockhead and asked if his brain was made of mashed potatoes. Wolfgang shot back, calling Yenrik the most insufferable dude on the planet, while Priestess Lana tried to calm them down. She kept timidly repeating that you can't fight or swear in the sacred temple, but nobody was listening. The argument escalated to threats of physical violence. Lana was in despair, and the holy woman showed up because she'd heard there'd been zero progress for days, and these two were constantly at each other's throats. The priestess's patience snapped. She lost it and slammed her fist into the floor with all her might. The holy woman yelled that she'd asked them not to curse in the temple and declared that grown men couldn't even agree on anything. She asked what kind of geniuses they were if all they'd done for days was bicker, causing absolutely no progress. Lana ordered them to apologize to each other immediately. Monica whispered to the lady that Priestess Lana was one of the enforcers of discipline in the temple. She also shared a rumor that some outsider tried to scam the main temple, but Priestess Lana caught him and beat him within an inch of his life. Besides, if Lana wasn't so into potions, the commander of the Holy Knights would have recruited her into their ranks a long time ago. After that, both alchemists immediately apologized to each other and promised to get along from then on. That's when Ordell burst out laughing, and Lana got all embarrassed, apologizing for the broken floor and offering to pay for the damage. The holy woman calmed her down, saying the repairs should be covered by the temple funds, since they were doing a general renovation anyway. To wrap things up, the holy woman assured her that she didn't have to worry about a thing here, and that she completely trusted Priestess Lana. The next morning, the alchemists greeted the holy woman, mentioning that the temple was looking more and more like a garden thanks to the renovations. Ordell immediately noticed that the alchemists looked terrible and asked if they hadn't slept all night. Genric explained that they hadn't made any progress after days of research, so they hadn't been sleeping, and the holy woman pointed out that the priestess seemed to have slept well. Lana replied sheepishly that she hadn't slept all night either, but she felt fine thanks to the holy power. The holy woman scolded them, saying you can't sleep when you're 6 feet under and you can't skip meals either. The conversation went back to the research, and one of the alchemists hoped that if the potion contained holy power, it should be better than a regular alchemical potion. But another one said disappointedly that so far their creation only heals minor cuts. Back to square one, huh? Still stuck on the idea that mixing amine flowers with middle grass will give us the perfect result. The saint, a little annoyed, asked if they were still on that blend and told them to maybe try something different. Seeing how stressed and tired they were, she offered them some tea and a break. The alchemists gratefully accepted. One of them said it was the best tea he'd ever had, and he felt strangely at peace. The saint explained it was tea made from dried hyacinth petals, which only grows at the main temple. It only needs sunlight and the holy power of the sun god to grow. Because it absorbs that holy power, it soothes the mind and body. Hearing that, an idea struck the alchemist. He shouted that it was exactly what they needed. A little later, the scene shifts to Shiori's mansion. The Duke was thinking how it had been exactly a month, like the saint said, and he wondered how he'd feel. He felt a surge of something. Surprised, he realized the saint was right about everything. Honestly, Root was skeptical that just wearing the amulet would have this much of an effect, since the pain was way more bearable than before. He was relieved to see that at least Ordell hadn't lied to him. The young man wondered if this cursed disease could ever be completely cured. He admitted to himself with a wry smile that he'd taken the bait, but it wasn't exactly unpleasant. On the contrary, it even seemed kind of funny for some reason. He called his servant Yuri and ordered him to prepare the carriage because they were going to the main temple of the sun god. The saint greeted the Duke with a slight reproach because she thought he would arrive earlier, but he came quite late. The Duke explained that he wanted to test the blessing's effect first. To herself, the saint thought he was saying he was late because he was checking if she was telling the truth, but he's got that sly grin on his face. The girl anxiously asked if he'd lost his mind from the pain, since the blessing's effect had worn off and it must be really rough on him. Root Shiori was still smiling. He explained that he was smiling because he was happy to see the saint and asked if the feeling wasn't mutual. He sadly realized the saintess was probably just after his money, but Ordell laughed, quickly denying it. Then, she invited the Duke to step into the lab. Inside, the alchemists greeted her. Lana said that preparing the amount of raw materials the lady mentioned would still take some time. Then she asked who was with the saintess, who formally introduced His Grace, Duke Shiori. She explained he'd be handling the distribution of the potions they created here. The alchemists were clearly impressed hearing the Duke's name. The saintess asked them to tell the Duke all about the new potion. One of the alchemists, Genric, enthusiastically volunteered, showing respect to the Duke. He began explaining that he thought if you mixed amine flowers and lindelgrass just right, it wouldn't be poison, but have the best effect. The young Duke asked if they'd found the right ratio, but the guy said no. But instead, he found a new ingredient that would perfectly combine their properties. This is a hyacinth flower. Genric explained it soaked up a ton of holy healing power, and it goes well with everything. When he added the flower, the two herbs didn't just mix well, but the effectiveness became 5 times greater than existing samples. He proudly declared that they could sell this potion as a prototype, and it wouldn't be second to any other. Addressing the Duke, the saint joyfully noted that all 3 of them had worked very hard. She promised to pay them an additional bonus for the successful development of the prototype. The alchemists and the novice were overjoyed and grateful. They swore to the saint that they would serve her faithfully from now on. The saint told the Duke she was glad she could show good results, and offered the Duke the prototypes to try out. The Duke stated that he was glad his money hadn't been wasted. The saint confessed that although the 2 alchemists have completely different personalities, and she was worried, they now get along great. She thanked the Duke for finding good alchemists. Monica recommended Genric, and Root recommended Wolfgang. The Duke just brushed it off, said it was nothing, and confessed that even the main temple of the sea god couldn't cure what ailed him. So, he was out of options. Way back when, searching for a cure, the Duke turned his attention to alchemy. Apparently, that's what led to his interest and investments in this project. That's when the Duke first met Wolfgang Schmidt. Rumor had it he was a genius. The Duke tried ordering medicines from him, but they didn't do squat. When Root had basically given up on finding a medical or alchemical solution, he stumbled across some ancient book. Looked like a regular history book about the Empire, but there was this one tiny line about how the sacred relic of light had healing powers. Ever since then, he's been grasping at straws, searching for this relic, and that's how he wound up here. The saint asked where that old book was now. The Duke said it was in the Imperial Library, only accessible to the royal family. But it's gone now. He explained that right after he looked at it, the paper crumbled to dust. Ordell said that sucked, because they could have studied the book. The saint wondered if that ancient book was even legit in the first place. Noticing how lost in thought she was, the Duke asked what was wrong. The saint quickly replied, "Nothing, nothing at all." Then she got down to business, offering to bless his relic. But instead, the Duke held out his palm to her. Ordell protested, but the young man said he wasn't just doing it for kicks. He asked for the potion, saying it would be great if the Duke, a patient with a unique condition, personally tested its effectiveness. The saint yelled that the Duke had clearly lost his mind. Then she started begging him, telling him under no circumstances should he let go of the relic. She warned that if the dark spots suddenly went wild, there was no telling what kind of side effects could occur. The Duke groaned and moaned in pain, so Ordell gave him the potion to drink. After clearing his throat a bit, the Duke remarked that it was no match for the sacred relic filled with blessings, of course. Still, the pain subsided a little, so the potion has a decent effect. The saint was still reeling from his risky move. "How can you even think straight right now?" she snapped, like she was disappointed in him. The Duke just smirked and guessed she was only pissed because she was worried about him. The saintess then fired up her blessing skill. Next, she told the Duke to try another potion, saying it was way better than the last one, like 3 or 4 times stronger at least. The girl was stoked, pointing out that given Root's condition, the potion was way more effective than Yenrik had figured. She told the Duke she'd recharged the relic with blessing and then laid down the law, telling him to cut the crap and come earlier next time. The Duke thanked her, then smugly mentioned that as soon as they had a batch ready, they could start raking in the dough. He also said he didn't forget to bring this month's donation and the fee for juicing up the relic. The Saintess squealed, calling him a sweetheart, and asked if he knew how much she loved him. The Duke dryly replied that she meant his money, and worried if the cash dried up, her love would vanish too. Ordal playfully wondered if the Duke could ever run out of money. The Duke said that was some smooth talking right there. For a split second, the girl thought Root looked bummed out, but she quickly convinced herself he had nothing to be upset about. All right, now we're jumping to the main temple of the sun god. There, Eric was genuinely blown away by how fast they whipped up a potion ready to sell. He was seriously impressed. Seth was also surprised when the holy woman announced that adding hyacinth, which only grows in the Great Temple, would make the potion even more special. The heroine pointed out that the success was thanks to Priestess Lana and the alchemists who worked their tails off all night. Then, she suggested imbuing the potions with the power of the sacred relics the temple possesses, saying it would make them even more unique. The high priest wondered if they really needed to go that far. The holy woman started passionately explaining that first impressions are everything, and from the get-go, they need to make everyone believe the sun god's potion is something extraordinary. The holy woman clarified it was temporary. Once the team of creators develops a better potion, they'll stop using it because the power of the sacred relics isn't unlimited. The high priest agreed with her points, said he understood everything, and gave her the go-ahead. The saintess excitedly yelled that she'd take care of it, and activated her potion blessing skill. To herself, she admitted she usually couldn't pull off such a powerful blessing, so she had to fib about using a different power. Ordell added that she felt guilty about constantly lying, but now success was practically guaranteed. Suddenly, the system warned that overuse of the blessing skill was putting excessive strain on her body. The saintess noticed her nose was bleeding. She bitterly remarked that even though her divine power had grown, she still couldn't handle even this much. She anxiously asked the system if it was shortening her lifespan. The system replied that it had no effect on longevity. However, body fatigue increases and it weakens temporarily. It was also added that as her divine power increases, the strain on her body will decrease. The saintess concluded with relief that she just needs to level up her divine power and the problem's solved. She vowed to be more careful, so others wouldn't notice and start to worry. So the job was done. Monica gushed that the potion looked way more mysterious and special than before. She happily added that it would definitely sell well. The pleased saint agreed and suggested they move the potions ASAP to start selling them faster. Ordell noticed that the Knight Victoria was on edge and asked what was up. The knight explained she smelled blood coming from somewhere. The saint pretended to be seriously alarmed, but Monica said she didn't smell anything. Ordell nodded in agreement. Victoria calmed down a little but still remained on guard. The saint worried, thinking she'd have to air out the place real good next time before calling them over, or she'd totally get busted. Eirik was talking to someone when the heroine approached him with her subordinates. The high priest greeted the saint and asked if she had finished her work. The saint confirmed that the potion enhancement was a total success and that the power-boosting incense worked perfectly. Eric's friend checked out the new potion, saying she'd seen a lot of potions but never one with such a glowing, mysterious color. Ordell thanked her and shyly asked who she was. Eric's friend chuckled. She apologized for not introducing herself earlier and said she was June, the deputy head of the Rumen Merchant Guild, which belongs to Duke Shiori. The saintess replied she was glad to meet her and introduced herself as Ordell, saintess of the sun god. June remarked that the saintess gave a different impression than the guild leader and Yuri had described. Ordell asked what they'd said. June replied that they'd said the saintess was a real piece of work and that you had to tread carefully around her. But, in her opinion, the saintess seemed like a good person. Ordell was initially distracted by June's magnificent muscles. Then she thought, annoyed, that Root, instead of minding his own business, was going around telling everyone about her unique personality. She vowed to get back at him for that, but outwardly she kept her cool and smiled, acknowledging June's perceptiveness. Before leaving, June and the saintess exchanged pleasantries. The saintess invited her to come chat over tea when she had more time. The girl happily agreed, assuring the saint as she left that she'd received all the necessary instructions from the guild leader and asked her to trust her. Still reeling from the sight of June's amazing muscles, Ordell was snapped out of her thoughts by the high priest's voice. He was surprised the deputy guild leader showed up in person, figuring it meant the Duke was super serious about investing in this. The saint asked why he thought so, and Eric wondered if she didn't already know. He explained that in the massive Rumen Guild, 3 teams handle the work, all reporting to the deputy leader. When the guild leader, the Duke, gives an order, the deputy relays it to each of the teams. The deputy only gets involved directly if they get a direct order from the Duke, because they're an incredibly competent person. Suddenly, the saint remembered that the guild's downfall was a turning point in the original story, after which Root turned evil. It was briefly mentioned that the trigger for this collapse was the death of an important person who was the link between the guild and Root. A chilling thought hit her. Could they have been talking about June Rudman? Meanwhile, word was getting around about the Rumen Trading Guild selling potions from the Great Sun God Temple. They say the guild's pushing a trial batch cheap, and they're actually pretty effective. Common folk are eating them up. This news didn't sit well with everyone, especially Louis Martin, head of the alchemical potion shop. He snapped, all worked up. Can you believe those Sun God Temple creeps are still around? While the Sun God Temple was fading, the Great Sea God Temple's supporters were focused on the nobility and the aristocracy. So since he catered to the common man, their paths never crossed, but now things were different. He realized that even though the Sun God Temple was starting with the commoners, sooner or later they'd try selling potions to the nobles and the imperial family. Louis Martin had a bright idea. He knew he couldn't compete with the Rumen Guild, but the Great Sea God Temple, that was a whole different ballgame. He decided to reach out to them. Carmen Aria, a holy woman from the Great Sea God Temple, was annoyed when she heard Louis Martin had sent a letter about potions. She snapped back that it was her subordinate's job, asking if he really expected her to deal with every little thing like that. The subordinate timidly replied that he'd read the letter, but this was something she, as the Holy One, needed to be aware of. He started to explain what it was about, but Carmen cut him off, warning him not to waste her time. However, when she grasped the situation, her reaction did a complete 180. She demanded to know with fury if those sons of guns from the Sun God Temple were still kicking around, desperately clinging to life. What really set her off was the mention that they'd formed an alliance with Root Shiori. She'd thought the Duke was going to become a follower of the Great Sea God, and even personally bestowed a blessing on him, but that arrogant jerk just scoffed and walked away. Carmen raged, asking why the guild was helping these lackeys, and how they even got connected in the first place. Just then, her brother, Dominic Aria, also a holy man of the Great Temple, showed up and asked what all the commotion was about. Her sister indignantly explained that those hangers-on, the Sun God's followers, were still alive, and the Rumen Guild was distributing their potions. Dominic was floored. The letter revealed that sales had already kicked off half a month ago. He snapped at his subordinate, asking why they were only finding out about this now. Carmen, unable to contain her rage, ordered the guilty servant to be taken away. The servant, terrified, begged for mercy, shouting that he was to blame, and pleading not to face some awful punishment. Dominic coldly ordered the person in charge of the potion business to be replaced immediately. Carmen bitterly admitted that the potion business was a golden opportunity for the Great Sea God to become the one and only top god. Dominic asked if there was any way to fix the situation, then asked his sister a crucial question. Had she received any revelations from God lately? Carmen grimly replied that she hadn't, and that it seemed he wasn't watching over her lately. Dominic confirmed that he hadn't felt divine energy in a while either. He pointed out that every time something important happened, the Great Sea God would send a revelation, and suggested they just observe for now. Dominic figured if Duke Shiori's helping out, it'll be tough to get to the bottom of things, so he suggested sending in an informant. Carmen liked the plan, adding that if her brother's thinking of that guy they've been grooming as an informant, he'll dig up anything. The Temple of the Sun God was buzzing with excitement. The heroine yelled, totally stoked, that all 500 bottles of sample potions were sold, and they're getting reservation requests left and right. Everyone cheered, saying it was unbelievable. Ordell said she hadn't predicted this kind of success and was clearly pleasantly surprised. She reminded them that, up until now, divine power potions were only available to the upper crust because of the price. So, selling them at a price that even commoners could afford really paid off. The saint admitted she had her doubts about whether it was too soon, but Monica single-handedly researched the market so thoroughly. Ordell noted that the Rumen Merchant Guild was a huge help too, thinking admiringly that raw power really speaks volumes. She declared that from now on, the potion-making team and the priests in charge of divine power are gonna have to work their tails off. Eric was the guy in charge of juicing up our potions with divine power. Seth gave him some encouraging words and a pat on the back. Made the heroine think she needed to buy them more meat to keep their strength up. The system just chimed in, said 1,000 people now know about the sun god rising from the dead, and our divine power's gone up by 0.1%. The saint was stoked, said the numbers are climbing just 'cause people are hearing about the sun god, and she confidently declared that the potion gig's gonna keep rolling, so even more people will learn about the sun god. Then Victoria walked in and politely but firmly asked the three of them to step out, 'cause Monica's parents were visiting the Grand Temple. The saint remembered the maid saying how she ran away from home, then awakened the sun god's divine power and came here. Ordell figured this runaway daughter meeting her parents thing was gonna blow up big time. But things went down totally different. Monica was proudly showing her parents that she'd awakened divine power. Her folks were over the moon. They were shouting how their little girl's an angel who awakened divine power. They were hugging her. The saintess was stunned, thinking she was about to get a spanking, but they were just chilling. Just then, Monica spotted the saintess and ran over. Seeing everyone gathered, Monica blushed and asked if they'd come because of her, apologizing for the trouble. She explained she hadn't gotten any messages herself, so she couldn't give them a heads up. The saintess was a little worried anyone seeing this might think they'd snatched their daughter. That's when Monica's father, Earl Jake Hentel from the East, turned to the heroine, asking if she was the saintess of this temple. The saintess confirmed it and asked who they were. The Earl introduced himself as Monica's father. Ordell retorted that as the saintess of one of the three main gods, the sun god, she had no reason to grovel before some Earl. Suddenly, Monica's mother jumped in, apologizing for their ignorance and introducing herself as Miriam Hentel. The woman confessed how heavy her heart had been the whole trip, since they hadn't heard from their daughter in over 6 months. The holy woman politely replied that they'd heard some things from Monica too, but the great sun god temple respects everyone's thoughts and freedom. So the parents should know the great temple has never forced any opinions on Monica. To herself, the holy woman worried, would they really let Monica go that easily? Ordell admitted to herself that ever since Monica became her assistant, life had gotten way easier. Plus, the kid's got a real knack for things, and she's a promising novice priestess. Then the holy woman suggested that since they hadn't seen each other in 6 months, they should talk privately about everything that's been going on. She directed Monica and her parents to a reception room, and also suggested the young novice show them around the great temple later. And so, everyone went their separate ways, and in the reception room, Count Hentel noted with surprise that things weren't so bad. Or rather, not as bad as he'd thought. He realized the holy woman here was a humble person. The man admitted he used to think all holy women were spendthrifts. Probably because he'd only seen the holy woman of the great sea god, Monica remembered that their old holy woman had been the embodiment of luxury. But she immediately added with passion that this witch and their saint were incomparable, and that she now lives humbly. Then her mother pointed out that her daughter had truly become a follower of the sun god. She bitterly reminded her that she'd made her parents cry for 6 months, and now she'd become a priestess. Monica apologized for making them worry so much, and explained that she didn't intentionally hide the awakening of her divine power. It happened suddenly, shortly after she ran away from home. Monica firmly stated that no one forced her to become a follower. She announced that she would live as a priestess of the sun god's temple her whole life, and therefore also didn't want to become the heir to the title. Monica's mother tried to persuade her to return, arguing that the place was too humble for her, and suggested she come home and talk. The father dismissed the temple of the sun god with disdain, saying it was on the verge of being completely forgotten, and even the corridors and garden looked poor. The Earl added that if it were a temple of the great god of the seas, he wouldn't be worried, and contemptuously called the sun god some nobody. He bluntly asked what she stood to gain by becoming a priestess of this place. Monica firmly replied that he shouldn't compare this place to such a worldly temple of the great god of the seas. The girl declared she didn't need personal gain or fame anymore, and the woman smiled, exclaiming with relief that she was their daughter after all. Miriam told her husband she was right. Monica wasn't coming home. The father finally caved and agreed. Her parents confessed they wanted to know their daughter's true feelings and told her that her brother had already decided to be the heir. Monica was thrilled and thanked her mom. Her mother smiled, saying she knew her daughter's personality and knew she'd just run away from home again anyway. Monica happily exclaimed how well her parents knew her, then got down to business, stating that something needed clarifying. She admitted the Great Temple was currently poor, but that would soon change, and proudly announced they'd recently started a potion business with the Rumen Merchant Guild. The father noted with surprise that even His Majesty the Emperor has trouble getting the Rumen Merchant Guild to do anything. Monica enthusiastically confirmed that their amazing saint did it all, including the potion business and missionary work. The girl added that the saint even saved her life. Her parents asked in surprise, "Saved you how?" Monica's parents, expressing their gratitude, suddenly declared they wanted to become patrons of the great temple of the sun god right then and there. The saint asked, surprised, what they were talking about. She thought to herself with a touch of irony that she hadn't done anything, but her patrons had come on their own. Monica's mother explained that she heard the saint had helped her daughter when she was attacked by a vassal of the Curie's family, and thanked her from the bottom of her heart. The father, embarrassed, apologized for his previous rudeness, admitting he hadn't known. The saint humbly pointed out that their precious daughter had suffered because of someone from her lineage, and asked for forgiveness. The father politely replied that it was no big deal, and added that he'd heard from Monica that the saint didn't have a very good relationship with the Curie's family. The saint confirmed that this was the case, and expressed a desire to cut all ties with that family. But she admitted there was a problem with donations, hinting at financial dependence. They assured the saint that they would solve the problem. Count Hentel advised the saint to seize the opportunity and cut off the rotten branch, promising to donate twice as much as Curie's. Ordell was amazed, thanked him, but explained that she was the count's adopted daughter, making a complete break difficult. Instead, she offered them and their daughter a chance to become followers of the sun god. The earl and countess were baffled. Ordell explained that if they became followers together, they'd have a legitimate reason to influence her temple. This would allow them to distance themselves from the family. The saint mentioned that Duke Shiori had also become a follower, which really surprised the earl and countess. The man said that since his daughter declared she wanted to live her life as a priestess here, he had no reason to refuse. Plus, if they got lucky, they could even marry into the Shiori family. Then Ordell suggested they register as followers right away. The heroine concluded that everything went great today. She got donations and increased the number of followers. Looks like Monica really is a capable maid who does her job well. Then the system announced that 2 followers had been registered under the sun god, and the divine power increased by 0.1%. Ordell was sure that Monica would spend time with her family today. The earl and countess really love their daughter. Victoria was blown away by how different the vibe was in this family compared to her own. The night girl said that if those were her parents, they'd be chasing her down with a sword and axe for running away. She added that after a discipline lesson disguised as a duel, they'd be dragging her unconscious body back home, because things were always weird like that. The saint asked if her parents were knights. Victoria replied that they were mercenaries running a mercenary company together. That's why they weren't exactly thrilled she became a holy knight. They wanted her to inherit the company. Ordell wasn't so sure about that, since she knew mercenaries worked for cash, and a knight wasn't supposed to be all about the money. The saint brought up their first meeting as an example, pointing out that Victoria knew how the saint lived in the Great Temple before, but never asked about it. Every morning she helped with training, never skipped her own, and prayed hard. The saint believed that a knight was someone with strong convictions, who acted on them. She figured someone like Victoria was way better suited to being a knight, especially a holy knight, than a mercenary. Ordell guessed Victoria's parents felt the same way, and the very fact she was here meant they'd acknowledged her as a holy knight. The night girl thanked the holy woman for her kind words. Ordell got into bed and asked her to turn off the light before leaving. Victoria pointed out that Monica was also gone today, and wondered if she really wanted to go to sleep alone. Ordell replied, of course, and that nothing bad could happen in just one day. Then Victoria wished the holy woman a good night. Left alone, the heroine thought to herself how wonderful it was that Monica and Victoria had such good parents. Sadly, Ordell noted that even before ending up here, she didn't have a family. She was bummed that the family she did get stuck with was the Curie's family. She figured that even though she didn't have a family, she did have something close to it. Ordell even wondered if her relatives were doing okay without her. Suddenly, the system blared a warning. A follower of another god had invaded the Great Temple. It announced that this guy was heading straight for the user, that's me, the saint, and he was out for blood. Ordal was stunned that someone actually wanted her dead. The system warned that if the saint didn't bail now, she was toast. Ordal thought, without the system, I'd be in deep trouble. The heroine figured plenty of people held a grudge against the saint, so she always knew some psycho would come calling eventually. Still, she was surprised he was a follower of another god. That was a bit of a curveball. But little did our girl know what was really coming. Good thing she had a little something cooked up just in case. Just then, the system pinged her again. The other god's follower was closing in fast. Another warning flashed, "Get out of here or you're done for." Then the system chimed in, saying the body enhancement skill was activated. She yanked a divine artifact from under her pillow and whacked the assassin with it. The masked guy started bleeding. Ordal was stoked the divine artifact actually came in handy. The system provided info on the item. Turns out it was a box of legendary rank made out of boredom. The assassin hit the floor. Ordal wondered if he was a goner. A little while later, the half-naked assassin was sitting on the floor, all tied up. The heroine explained there weren't any handcuffs or rope or anything else useful, so she tied up the bad guy with his own clothes. She insisted she only did it because that was the only way to tie him up, and stressed she wasn't some kind of weirdo. Ordal grilled the prisoner, asking if he really was a minion of another god, and which temple sent him. But the guy clammed up tight. The saint expected he wouldn't spill the beans right away. The heroine figured she hadn't met any gods directly yet, but this was probably a messenger from the great sea god. The saint guessed that he was probably just jealous of their recent success selling potions. Still, sending an assassin right away seemed like overkill. Ordal turned to the prisoner and asked what his orders were. The prisoner stayed silent again. Even though the saint demanded an answer in a stern voice, the heroine figured the blow must have been too hard. The girl knew she still needed to get proof that these creeps from the Great Sea God's temple had sent the assassin. So there was nothing else for it. Ordal activated her healing skill, and the target's wounds healed up. With a hint of irony, the heroine remarked she hadn't expected the first person she'd use her healing power on to be an assassin. Suddenly, blood started dripping from the saint's nose. Ordal collapsed to the floor, not understanding what was happening or why it was so sudden. The system announced that the healing power of the sun, resurrected after death, was clashing with the curse of the wrathful sea. Word was, the user's body was taking a beating. Ordal panicked, wondering what fresh hell this wrathful sea curse was. Then she remembered a line from the original novel about Idella being terrified. Jeremy Cowles was decked out in the Great Sea God's curse like it was freaking armor, so no attacks or mind tricks worked on him. That's why he could never betray the god. Then Idella realized the prisoner wasn't just some killer, he was a candidate for Holy Knight Commander. And that's just a label others forced on him. Jeremy Cowles was a branded slave of the god. Now Ordal understood. This killer was Jeremy Cowles, the one cursed by the wrathful sea, and he had those freaky pink eyes. The saint was stoked with her own detective work. This was definitely Jeremy Cowles. But now Ordal was stuck asking herself, what the heck was she supposed to do? Suddenly Jeremy screamed and started contorting all weird. She couldn't figure out what was going on with him. Seth was walking down the hall, thinking about how Priestess Monica wasn't even around the saint today. He was worried, wanted to know if the saintess was okay. He listened closely, noting the corridor was quiet for now, but that didn't mean he could let his guard down. Suddenly, he heard a scream coming from the saintess's chambers. He burst into the heroine's room without knocking, asking with a worried voice if she was all right. The saintess stammered, trying to explain herself so she wouldn't be misunderstood. She explained that the stranger had suddenly screamed and collapsed, so she was healing him. Regarding his clothes, the saintess also tried to explain something, but she was unsure of herself. Then she thought, if she said he was an assassin sent by the great sea god, crazy Seth would off him. She realized she couldn't let that happen. Meanwhile, Seth noticed blood on the saintess's skin and clothes. The saintess assured him she was fine, just got a little carried away with her divine power, but there were no wounds. The commander figured this whole mess started because of that lowlife, but the saint swore the guy wasn't a threat anymore, that she'd already taken him down. She pointed out she'd ripped his clothes and tied him up as proof, and Seth agreed it was a clever solution. He was all fired up to punish the creep for attacking the saint and making her bleed. But the commander said they had to follow procedure until they figured out who was behind this. First things first, they needed to throw the guy in the dungeon and grill him to find out who sent him. Seth also promised to beef up security at the temple and give the saint a personal bodyguard, but she argued Monica and Victoria were enough. Seth shot back that it wasn't enough, especially since the saint was often alone at night, and look what happened today. Ordell said they'd talk about that later, but first they needed to deal with this would-be killer. She told the commander of the Holy Knights that she needed to get some answers from this guy too, and that she'd be handling the interrogation herself. Ordell emphasized that he absolutely couldn't be killed before then, and Seth confirmed he understood. The saint asked Seth to promise, but instead he said he'd report the situation to the high priest. Turning to the saint, he figured she must have been scared out of her mind, and told her not to worry and get some rest. Seth assured her that no one would bother her again that night. The next day, the saint woke up at 7 a.m. She said, with a touch of sarcasm, that even after a nightmare like that, she still had to be up at 7. Apparently, the concept of sleeping in just doesn't exist in her life. Ordell stated that she wasn't up for any heavy exercise. So, the saint decided to just do some light stretching. But when she opened the door, she saw the back of the commander of the Holy Knights. He asked if she was already awake, and guessed she must be tired after yesterday's incident, so he told her to get some more sleep. Ordell replied that she was used to waking up early, but there were more important things to talk about right now. She asked, surprised, if Seth had been standing at her door since last night. The commander reminded her that he said no one would dare disturb the saint, and she realized it wasn't just a polite expression, but a promise to guard her sleep all night. That was sweet of him, but Ordell also noticed that even though a swordmaster wouldn't get tired from one sleepless night, he looked paler than she did. The heroine guessed to herself that something else must have happened, and thanked him, saying she hadn't woken up once and slept soundly until morning. The commander replied that he was glad she had a good night's sleep. A rumor spread among the maids that an intruder had broken into the temple. One of them said in surprise that she hadn't known about it. Another pointed out that it was strange since everyone knew the temple was poor, and asked who was attacked. Her friend replied that the saintess was attacked, and the girl was extremely surprised that she was the target. She was sure that whoever the attacker was, they were going to be in a world of hurt. The other maid noted that the saintess seemed to have changed a little recently. Another maid objected that you can't change your nature that easily, and someone added that they wouldn't be surprised if the saintess had already torn the attacker limb from limb. All the maids agreed and began to laugh. Then someone asked, as if in passing, if the saintess herself was hurt in the process. So, the heroine's grabbing lunch in the mess hall with Seth. The saintess asks the commander of the Holy Knights where Victoria is. He tells her she's off handling some second division business for a bit. Then he asks if the saintess feels uneasy with him around instead of Victoria. The saintess quickly assures him that's not the case at all, and that the commander's super dependable. She mentions it's a secret from Victoria, 'cause she'd get bummed out if she knew. The saintess also figures Victoria's second division stuff might be connected to protecting her. Catching the commander smirking, the saintess jokingly tells him not to try charming her with his good looks, and to say something already. Getting serious, the commander declares they can't just sit around anymore after that attack. He emphasizes that the safety of the saintess is crucial to the safety of the entire Grand Temple. He asked her to trust him and let him take care of it. The saint, kinda giving in, said that if he put it that way, what could she do? She understood and agreed. Suddenly, she noticed everyone present was gradually leaving the dining hall. The saint wondered what was going on and if she'd done something wrong. The saint figured the rumors about yesterday's incident had already spread. The commander asked if they should order everyone to shut their traps right now. The saint replied that it was no use anymore, since the rumors had definitely already spread throughout the temple. She suggested to Seth that they go meet the prisoner guy, and she thought with annoyance that her whole image was ruined because of those creeps from the cult of the great sea god, but she wouldn't let them get away with it. The saint and the commander of the Holy Knights descended into the underground dungeon. Ordell remarked that it was pretty bright for an underground dungeon. The commander explained that this place is built out of stone, and it has the ability to block magic, sword energy, divine power, other gods, and all that jazz. Turns out only the sun god's divine power works here. In the dungeon, they met the high priest, and he greeted the saint. He said he heard she was coughing up blood and asked how she was feeling. The heroine thought his expression looked off, but then she figured she was just imagining it and replied that she slept great and woke up refreshed, so everything's cool. The high priest apologized and touched her for a sec to check her out. He explained that if she felt bad, she'd heal herself, but he'd check just in case. Ordal realized Eric was saying that on purpose. 'Cause if he healed her silently, Seth, who doesn't know she's a fake saint might get suspicious. The girl wondered if the priest was worried about her, and noted that she'd felt that before, but still, Eric really is kind to her. Ordal complimented him, thanked him for it, and the high priest was floored. Startled, he jumped back about a yard from the holy woman and stammered that everything was normal, thank goodness. The heroine was confused. Eric announced that before the holy woman started interrogating him, he'd tell them what he'd managed to dig up. He pointed at the prisoner and said that the guy was completely shrouded in divine power. Traces of the great god of the seas were all over him. He explained that while people use divine power after receiving a blessing from God, the power of God is the actual strength that God himself uses. Eric pointed out that since the prisoner was so densely covered in God's power, it was no wonder the commander of the Holy Knights hadn't noticed his presence. The holy woman asked the high priest if the guy was dead, since he was so quiet. The high priest replied that he was conscious. Eric added that the perp wasn't reacting at all, even when he focused his divine power on him. The holy woman thought to herself that it was weird. From what she remembered, Jeremy, being cursed, should have an instinct to return, and he should be trying to get back to the great temple of the god of the seas. She guessed maybe it was because he hadn't completed his mission yet. Ordal asked Seth to hand her bag. As the holy woman opened it, the commander of the Holy Knights asked what it was and what she was planning to do. The holy woman stepped closer to the prisoner. She wound up and smacked him over the head as hard as she could. Jeremy felt a sharp, deafening pain like a dagger had been plunged into his skull. Even Eric and Seth were shocked by the holy woman's behavior. Jeremy started to groan. The heroine, holding some kind of box, remarked that it felt better in her hand than it did yesterday. She wondered if it was the reincarnation of a police baton, which used to be his best pal. Eric and Seth asked her what was up with her. Ordal happily pointed out that the box was getting a reaction from the prisoner, who was shrouded in the power of the great sea god since he was starting to make noises. The high priest guessed that Jeremy just had a splitting headache. The holy woman explained that physical attacks shouldn't work on this guy, but he's definitely reacting to this box, just like last night. Seth asked if that was the box that held the relic of light, and the holy woman confirmed that it was. She pointed out that since the relic of light broke so easily but the box remained intact, it must be a divine object. Eric agreed, stating that a divine object from the great god of the seas wouldn't harm this man. He suggested that the box seems to be a divine object of the god of destruction. The holy woman asked why a divine object of the god of destruction would be in their temple, and used to store the relic of light, no less. Eric replied that he didn't know, but noted that it was a good discovery, and ordered them to immediately prepare for the prisoner's execution. The commander agreed, declaring there's no reason to keep this murderer alive any longer, and ordered them to pass sentence quickly. However, the holy woman was shocked and spoke out against it. The main character suggested that if the prisoner is blessed with the power of the great god of the seas, it's better to win him over to their side than to kill him. To herself, gotta remember not to go off script and ice a major character from the original story. She checked out the prisoner. Dude's eyes are totally blank, no brain activity. He's definitely being used. When asked if God was really empowering him, she said, considering how shady the great sea god is, it's definitely possible. So she suggested stripping him of his divine power, bringing him back to his senses, and then deciding what to do with him. The commander didn't get why she'd give a killer a chance. She explained that if the prisoner goes back, he's just facing more brutal training and kill orders. She added that this guy's just gonna wander around like a murder bot, following orders with no free will of his own. She admitted to herself that in the original story, Jeremy was supposed to save Idel. But she can't just leave this poor dude to be tortured. Ordal maybe could, but not Cha Shawan. In the end, the high priest agreed with her. Only the saintess gets to decide what to do. Still, he doubted she could handle stripping divine power. He pointed out it's no walk in the park. The heroine was surprised he trusted her, since in the original story, Eric never trusted Ordal. She asked him to leave this to her. By the time the moon was out, the saint was still locked up in the dungeon. She started lifting the curse, noting to herself that even saving Root hadn't been this hard. The girl mentally reached out to the prisoner, telling him that when he woke up, he absolutely had to help her. She remembered how amazed she was by the effect when she added a blessing to the divine item, Aurora. and figured that if she put a box on him and poured divine power into it, the curse might weaken a little. She prayed silently that it would work. Skill, blessing, activated. Jeremy started moaning and groaning in pain. But suddenly, the system flashed a warning about excessive use of divine power. They said it puts a huge strain on your body and recommended stopping immediately. Even with the warning, the saint kept going, because the system didn't say lifting the curse was impossible. She figured if she poured in even more divine power and blessings, she could break the curse. The system gave a new warning. The Wrathful Sea's curse and the user's divine power are clashing. It said if she kept trying, her lifespan would be shortened. The saint realized with horror that she'd have to sacrifice her life to lift the curse. She yelled that she'd give up because of that. This was her second life and she'd still lose it. The heroine turned to the sun god, and she boldly declared that if she died like this, he'd be in trouble too. So he better grab the great sea god by the hair and tell him to let the kid go. Ordell was losing more and more blood every second. Jeremy's pain was getting worse. He was screaming. The situation was super intense. Despite the pain and the system's warnings, the girl kept going, begging it to hurry and pouring in even more divine power. Finally, her body reached its limit, and the system initiated a forced shutdown of the user's consciousness. But her efforts paid off. Part of the Great Sea God's curse was lifted, and the exhausted saint collapsed against Jeremy. Before blacking out, she thought with relief, "Thank God I did it." Suddenly, everything changed. Iced tea sat on the table in front of her. Cha Shiwan heard someone calling her name. She fully regained consciousness and realized her childhood friend, Ju Hyun-jin, was sitting across from her. The long-haired brunette asked angrily if her friend had actually fallen asleep mid-conversation. Ju Hyun-jin was indignant, asking if her lectures were that boring. Cha Shiwan was totally confused. She looked around, trying to figure out where she was. Her friend asked what was wrong, and she stammered an excuse, saying she'd dozed off. The long-haired brunette huffed, calling her friend weird, then went back to what they were talking about. She reminded Cha Shiwan that she was completely against her going to the police academy, since investigators are always facing danger. The brunette added that if her friend was so eager to get into dangerous situations, she'd be better off joining the army. "My girl just said she's going for cake." I was like, "Huh? You hate sweets?" But she just told me to shut my trap. I watched Ju Hyun-jin walk away, all soft inside. That girl's a real piece of work, which is probably why I'm her only friend. People ask me why I even hang out with such a bitch, but deep down, she's got the biggest heart. Ju Hyun-jin was my precious childhood friend. Even if I wanted to, I could never hate her. That morning, the holy woman was lying unconscious in bed. The high priest announced the treatment was complete, and if she just rests, she'll be back on her feet in no time. Monica was beating herself up, saying she shouldn't have gone to the village. She should have stayed at the temple, especially since this happened the one day she was gone. Victoria calmed her down, reminding her that Monica hadn't seen her parents in ages, so the holy woman wouldn't have held it against her. Then Monica just explodes, yelling she'll kill whoever dared to do this to the holy woman. The high priest said he understood her feelings, but the holy woman wasn't the victim of a killer. Monica's face just froze in confusion. He explained that the holy woman herself caught the killer, wanting to punish him after he demonstrated his hidden divine power. In the process, she apparently overused her divine power and passed out. Luckily, the head knight quickly found the holy woman. Eric admitted to himself that she doesn't have that much divine power to begin with. So Eric thought she'd quickly give up and come to him. He didn't know she'd have such a strong desire to save the killer. If he'd known Ordell would be so reckless, he would have just taken care of the killer himself on the spot. Victoria thought that even though she hasn't been with the holy woman for very long, she doesn't think she does anything without a good reason. Then the girl remembered that the last time she saw the prisoner, he was pretty good looking. Plus, when the holy woman took off his clothes to tie him up and prevent his escape, the prisoner had a pretty ripped body. Victoria also mentally noted that the holy woman was actively talking to Duke Shiori, giving him her attention. Based on these observations, the night girl concluded that the holy woman has a thing for handsome guys. She knew she was right, realizing the only thing connecting them was their looks. Knight Victoria was stunned by the thought, and when asked what was wrong, she mumbled that it was nothing and she was just worried about the saintess. Victoria vowed to herself that she would guard the saintess closely from now on, so she wouldn't fall for some handsome face and get into trouble. Then, the high priest turned to the great sun god with a prayer, asking him to watch over his daughter. A few hours later, the saintess opened her eyes, and Monica asked if her head hurt and if she should call the high priest. The saintess replied that she was fine and that she just had a weird dream. She saw her friend Ju Hyun-jin in the dream and wondered how she was doing. The heroine remembered her friend crying and complaining that she had warned her not to become a detective. Her friend yelled that if she died like this, she'd get it from her, and demanded that Cha Shi-won hear her. The saintess wondered why she suddenly had such a dream, and Monica asked what the dream was about. Ordell said it was a dream, and Monica was surprised, asking if she even had any friends. But the saint said that wasn't something you should say, and just then the heroine noticed the young maid was crying and asked why. Monica, all worked up, started saying that aside from trying to off the saint, she even coughed up blood trying to save the killer. Monica declared she'd be by the saint's side from now on and wouldn't leave her for anything. The saint, trying to calm her down, asked if Monica knew that she was the one who caught the killer red-handed. Monica insisted it didn't matter how she caught him, since she got hurt in the end, so the saint just agreed to calm her down. And then she apologized for scaring Monica, adding that she didn't even know she was going to pass out. The heroine admitted she didn't regret what she did, 'cause it was worth it, which didn't even surprise Monica. I mean, nobody even expected Ordell to have regrets. Everyone knows the saint ain't the type to do things she'll regret later. The saint asked, surprised, if it was true that everyone already understood her, and Monica replied that they loved her a lot, which is why they knew her so well. Ordell figured she was hated less than before, which meant all her hard work hadn't been for nothing. Then she got back to the prisoner, asking about that killer. Monica said he was finally in a state where they could actually talk to him. The saint remembered that before she blacked out, she thought she saw Jeremy's eyes clear up for a second. Monica said the prisoner kept begging to talk to the saint, but Ordell replied that she wasn't up for a conversation right now. Monica agreed that was a good idea. She promised to whip up their signature soufflé and told her to get some rest. 2 days later, the saint went to the dungeon where the prisoner was being held. The captain of the Holy Knights asked how she was feeling. The saint replied that she felt completely fine when she woke up, so there was nothing to worry about now. The captain of the Holy Knights said he didn't think the day would ever come when he wouldn't worry about her. The saint asked, surprised, if she was really that much trouble, but everyone politely kept their mouths shut. Then the holy woman announced she was there to talk to the prisoner. Seth replied that he'd been expecting her and let her pass. Seeing the prisoner, the holy woman remarked that his gaze had changed. She greeted him, guessing he probably didn't remember her, but the prisoner replied that he did, and called her a bully. The holy woman objected, saying that was a bit much, considering she'd saved him, and it was only natural to resist when he was trying to off her. The prisoner countered that she'd been beating him while he was defenseless. The holy woman stated she wouldn't apologize, since it was all necessary, and she asked if he knew why she did it. Jeremy said the holy woman was hitting him on purpose to bring him back to his senses. He explained that every time she whacked him on the head with that brick or box, he regained a little more awareness. Turns out the guy also remembered that everyone was against keeping him alive, but the holy woman begged them to trust her. The heroine noted to herself that even though he'd lost control of his body, obeying the sea god's will, he'd still seen everything and even remembered it. Then the saintess asked what Jeremy Cowles thought of the priests of the great sea god's temple, and the guy just went off on a furious rant. He called them greedy bloodsuckers, the most ruthless tyrants alive, and corrupt thugs. The saintess clarified, asking if he revered them as his masters, and Jeremy shot back, outraged. How could anyone respect trash like that? He added that they were constantly trying to push him around, so the saintess concluded he hated them and didn't want to go back. Jeremy said he'd rather stay locked up right there, and the saintess agreed to provide him with everything he needed. She offered to get him out of there if he promised to cut ties with the great sea god's temple and become a follower of the great sun god's temple. Jeremy asked why the saintess, after everything he'd done, was offering him this, and the saintess explained that she could see he didn't do it on purpose. Besides, it was obvious that serving the great sea god was a burden to him. Seth chimed in, saying it wasn't a problem that could be solved so easily. Jeremy said that the curse was still on his body, and he was even still talking thanks to the box. The system reported that half the curse remained on Jeremy's body, and the user's divine power wasn't enough to remove it. Seth was like, if the great sea god himself gave Jeremy this power, why is everyone calling it a curse that needs to be broken? Jeremy shot back that the great sea god's power was crushing him, controlling his will, totally breaking him down. "If that ain't a divine curse, what is?" He told him not to think divine power is always a good thing, and declared he wanted to shake off that god's influence. The saint agreed, saying if the guy himself doesn't want it, then it's a curse, not a blessing, plain and simple. She promised she'd set him free someday, no question about it, and just asked him to trust her on this. That's when Victoria jumped in, telling the saint that no matter what, this guy was still hard to trust. The saint knew she didn't have enough divine power right now, and she wouldn't be able to lift Jeremy's curse. Ordal thought to herself that she needed to rake in a serious amount of dough for another shot at this, and asked them to give her time. The heroine promised she could completely lift the curse, just trust her and hang tight. Then Jeremy apologized to the saint for attacking her and added that he wasn't trying to kill her, just, relocate her. The angry saint asked why, if he himself was kidnapped, he was kidnapping others. Jeremy apologized again for trying to kidnap her. And then he thanked her for her help and rescue. The saint thought it was weird how awkward this guy was. Originally, Jeremy was a key character who protected the heroine, resisting the god who was manipulating them. He suffered for a whole year under the oppression of the great god of the seas, but after being freed from his suffering, he became a different person, like Duke Ruth. The saint offered to tell Jeremy about a way to teach those who tormented him a lesson, and asked if he wanted to put on a little show with her. Jeremy asked in surprise, "What kind of show are we talking about?" Several days later, a high-ranking priest of the great god of the seas named Chambers arrived at the great temple of the sun god. He remarked with disdain that he had arrived in this dump. Dominic stated that they had been informed that their precious lamb was currently being cruelly persecuted by heretics. He ordered them to save Jeremy cows at all costs, making sure he wasn't harmed, adding he wouldn't even consider the possibility of them failing to bring him back. He explained that Jeremy was a talent sent to them by the great sea god himself. Dominic threatened that if the priest failed the mission, they'd face not only his punishment, but the wrath of the great sea god too. So, Priest Chambers and his escorts approached the temple gates and demanded they be opened, announcing they were from the great temple of the sea god. The guards at the gate replied that outsiders without prior authorization were forbidden to enter. Chambers' companion indignantly stated that this man was a high-ranking priest of the great temple of the sea god. The guard demanded proof, otherwise they weren't getting in. Chambers showed his great priest identification. The guard confirmed it and said he'd report this inside, and they'd have to wait there for now. Chambers flew into a rage at this treatment, inwardly fuming. How dare this nearly collapsed temple humiliate him like this? He believed such insolent jerks shouldn't expect mercy. A second later, Priest Dietrich Villen came out to meet Priest Chambers. He greeted him and invited him in. Chambers grumbled, clearly annoyed. "I thought the high priest himself would come out." Dietrich replied politely but firmly, "The high priest's position doesn't allow him to handle these kinds of matters." Dietrich added, "A high-ranking priest must possess not only great divine power, but also dedicate a long time to the temple itself." Chambers scornfully surveyed the temple, thinking to himself, "They're seriously short on manpower here." He noted the neglected garden, the cracked exterior walls, and the shabby clothes of the attendants. He wondered how they'd managed to grab Jeremy cows in such a dump, but he was sure a little pressure would sort everything out. Chambers stated, "I need to speak with the high priest, and I trust Dietrich won't be tagging along." However, Dietrich replied, "You'll be meeting someone even higher than the high priest." And he instructed, "When the door opens, greet the daughter of the sun god, Saint Ordel." When Chambers entered, he was stunned, feeling such an aura could emanate from a person. Sir Seth Noen, head of the Holy Knights, asked Chambers why he wasn't greeting the saint. The guy snapped to it and greeted them, introducing himself as Chambers, a high-ranking priest of the great sea god temple. In his head, he was freaking out that he wasn't just dealing with the saint, but also the head of the Holy Knights. He was racking his brain, wondering how the saint and the head Holy Knight could have such a powerful aura in this dump of a temple. This throws a wrench in everything. He realized he totally miscalculated. These guys aren't the pushovers he thought they were. The saint told him to sit down. Chambers apologized for interrupting the saint's tea. Ordel remarked, a little surprised, that the guest showed up unannounced, and she was pretty surprised since the temples stopped talking ages ago. The girl said it must be urgent, since someone from the great sea god tried to off the saint of the sun god. Chambers knew that was a load of bull. Jeremy was ordered to snatch someone suitable who knows the temple inside and out. He realized he couldn't let that slip, 'cause that'd be like admitting his temple sent an assassin, and then this saint would definitely make him pay. Ordal was figuring out how to make absolutely sure she had the upper hand with their guest, so she juiced up her aura with a little divine power. And luckily it worked. That way the priest wouldn't suspect she's a fake saint with only 10% of the real deal. She was pissed that even though they didn't exactly have the best relationship, sending an assassin was seriously crossing the line. Chambers replied that she seemed to have misunderstood something. The saint said she vividly remembered the assassin waving a knife around in her bedroom, aiming right at her. He confirmed it was true, and that he'd come to take back the person they were holding there. Chambers admitted that even they didn't know why that guy came there, and they definitely didn't order any assassination. Ordal sarcastically remarked that of course they were going to deny it. Chambers started explaining that in their temple, they transmit missions to Jeremy through divine power, and it seemed like there was a glitch that time. He insisted it was an unforeseen accident for them too, and this time the commander of the Holy Knights was outraged. He asked if an assassin invading the saint's bedroom, plus the presence of a guy from the great temple of the sea god, was all just a coincidence. With tears in her eyes, the holy woman added that even though time had passed, she still couldn't sleep soundly at night. To which he asked in surprise if she had been injured. Ordal said that she had healed her body but didn't know what to do with her soul. The heroine declared, swearing by the sun god, that she had never spilled so much blood before, so she should receive full compensation for this incident. Chambers said that they would certainly take responsibility and compensate for everything. However, there were conditions. They should immediately hand over that person to them and keep this matter a secret. To herself, Ordal was disgusted that the priest was acting so sleazy. She agreed, because it was impossible to wound the prisoner due to his divine power anyway, so they couldn't even torture him. Then she named the sum of 100,000 gold. Chambers was shocked and yelled that 100,000 gold was outrageous. The heroine defiantly asked if that was too much, since the holy woman of the temple of the great sun god almost died because of the great sea god's mistake. He began to bargain, offering 20,000 gold, claiming that it was really difficult to give more. She agreed, noting that she wanted to be done with this headache as soon as possible. The man thanked her for her profound mercy. She thought to herself that she'd just blurted out 100,000 gold, but she was really thinking about 10,000. Then the priest himself offered twice as much. Then she declared they were done talking about damage compensation and suggested they discuss the ransom. At his surprised exclamation, she explained that the fee for handing over the assassin and compensation for the damage she suffered should be separate. Chambers seemed speechless with shock. With feigned incomprehension, Ordal asked if there was a problem. The commander thought to himself that their Holy One was truly unbelievable. In the end, 20,000 gold was paid as compensation for damages and 10,000 gold as ransom for Jeremy. The next day, a group of guards led by Chambers was transporting Jeremy to the temple of the sea god. During a rest stop, one of the sea god temple servants frantically informed the priest that Sir Jeremy had vanished. The priest asked in shock what happened. The servant explained that he'd just checked and everything was fine, but the carriage was empty. The priest furiously flung open the carriage and yelled, "What the heck is this?" He ordered them to find Jeremy immediately, threatening them with death if they failed. Another servant, making excuses, said he was sorry, but the window must have just been covered and they were told not to give him any food. He added that when Jeremy was put in the carriage, he seemed totally normal. The priest despaired, thinking that God personally managing Jeremy was a real head-scratcher. Most people at the temple just knew him as a special knight. Chambers lamented that he'd forbidden the guy from contacting other knights to hide his delicate condition. And now look what's happened. Meanwhile, at the temple of the sun god, there was a knock at the door. The holy woman gave the okay to enter, and a smiling Jeremy stood on the threshold. They greeted each other, and the holy woman asked if he'd fooled Chambers good. Jeremy enthusiastically confirmed that sneaking around was totally his thing. The holy woman praised him and said she'd specially prepared a snack for him so he could eat his fill. She pointed out that with Jeremy back in the picture, their little show went off without a hitch. The plan was to rough him up a bit, pretend to hold him for ransom, and then let the kid escape. Back in the dungeon, Ordal told Jeremy it was his call whether he came back or not. If he wanted a fresh start, he could just leave. But if he did come back, the saint, even if it took a while, would grant him complete freedom, no strings attached. Right now, the system's pinging a divine item called the Sun-Shattered Gem. Stats are unique rank, God Owner, Soul Guiding Traveler, and its power is light nullification. Apparently, it's a gem the Saint of the Sun god ripped off a divine item called the Boredom Box. Inside that gem are the creator's tears, bottled up. The saint thought to herself that the soul was still a divine item of the god of destruction, a god tied to death. The saint sliced off the gem with a dagger and made a necklace, since Jeremy couldn't exactly carry around a cow all the time. Jeremy asked if he could go back to the dungeon now, and Ordal asked, surprised, why would he want to? Jeremy started explaining that it would put the saint at ease, and the others too, but the saint cut him off. She declared that from now on, only the 4 of them who were in the dungeon, plus the high priest, would know about his face and what he'd be doing. She emphasized that none of them would want to lock up an innocent man, and the saint announced that she'd already made up her mind. The heroine offered him a room, and Jeremy was surprised that sunlight got in there. The saint told him to live there and protect her. Jeremy agreed, promising that if the great sea god sent people again, he'd take responsibility and deal with them. He finished by saying he ate all the cookies and asked for more. So Dominic Aria finished off Chambers. Dominica was amazed that the jerk who lost Jeremy still dared to hope for forgiveness. He dismissively ordered a servant to clean up the mess and left. Dominic was thinking that no matter how hard these sun god lackeys try, the reality is they can't even hold a candle to the greatness of the great god of the seas. He figured the incident with the temple invasion and capturing that other god's power vessel could have been smoothed over with cash. And shelling out 30 grand in gold wasn't the issue, but right now, Jeremy's location was the real problem. Dominic knew Jeremy's personality was suppressed by divine power, and he only followed orders given by him and Carmen. He understood that if anything happened, Jeremy should return to the great temple of the sea god, unless the god himself gave the order. Dominic greeted his heavenly father and reported that their lamb still hadn't returned, and pleaded with God to answer if this was his doing. But not a single sound came, and Dominic anxiously asked why God was silent. The young man noted that God never ignored anything concerning Jeremy. A terrible fear gripped Dominic at the thought that something might have happened to God. Meanwhile, Ordal activated the blessing skill. This time it was 1,000 bottles, twice as many as before. So the heroine coughed up even more blood, thinking with annoyance, why won't this blood just stop? The holy woman thought that a handkerchief with this much blood on it would be hard to sneak out unnoticed, and wondered, what the heck was she going to do? She noted that it was still autumn and the fireplace wasn't lit, so burning the handkerchief was out of the question. Suddenly, Jeremy dropped from the ceiling and asked if the holy woman was dying, and she screamed in fright. Then she asked what he wanted and why he was there, and the guy reminded her that she told him to protect her. The heroine retorted that even though she said that, being in such a dump was inappropriate, and ordered him to get down first. At first, he refused, stating that it was much cozier here than where he lived in the grand temple of the sea god. Then he saw cookies and climbed down. He described that in that temple, divine scriptures were carved everywhere, binding the body and mind, so that even breathing was difficult. In her head, she was fuming about making a guy live in a dump like this, and vowed to give someone a piece of her mind when she saw them. Jeremy mentioned the ceiling was perfect for secretly guarding the saintess. She thanked him and laid down a few ground rules. Ordal explained that anything she does in secret stays secret, and even if he happens to see something, it's top secret, understood. He agreed to keep his mouth shut, and she hoped he really got the message. Then she asked him to ditch the scarf without anyone noticing, and he promised he would. Jeremy stopped munching on his cookie and asked the saintess, "Who are those guys outside?" He figured they were tearing down the great temple and suggested the saintess give the order to take them out. Ordal shot back that they weren't tearing it down, they were doing renovations, and absolutely forbade him from killing them. She explained that they were workers sent by the Hentel couple, who are experienced in expanding temples and are really good craftsmen. The saintess added that they also sent a cook, and starting with tonight's dinner, the food's gonna be way better. The Hentel region, the country's breadbasket, has always had tons of amazing cooks thanks to its abundance of ingredients. What surprised the heroine wasn't so much that, but that Monica, the eldest daughter of the family that owns that breadbasket, aka a rich family, was here. She figured they just dumped their precious daughter, who they'd pampered in a wealthy family, at a rundown temple. And that's why the Count and Countess initially looked at her like they wanted to end her. No surprise there. The saint pointed out that she'd paid extra to the cooks and workers, so they'd probably try their best. Jeremy was surprised, asking where they got the money and how the saint paid them. The saint explained that they had money they'd received from the temple of the sea god. Ordal added that with the remaining money, they'd announce the start of full operations by holding a dedication ceremony. So the dedication ceremony is held on January 1st, and believers offer gifts and prayers to express their gratitude to God. God, in turn, bestows blessings upon the believers, strengthening their connection. This ceremony is an integral part of life at the Great Temple. However, until now, the Great Temple of the Sun God hasn't had any money or anything else to offer. So the offering ceremony hadn't been held in ages, but then one day, everything changed. The saint announced she wanted to do it. She explained that even though it wasn't January 1st, since the opportunity was there, it'd be a good idea to go ahead. And she asked what everyone thought. Seth was all over it, saying he was definitely in, and he was sure the high priest would be stoked too. Eric agreed, promising to do everything he could to prepare, and that he'd trust her completely and follow her lead. Then he asked what exactly she was planning to offer. The saint replied that it would be cold, hard cash. She specified it was half of the 30 grand she got, supposedly as ransom for Jeremy and compensation for her troubles. To herself, she thought that this money couldn't be squirreled away like the recharge fee for Root, so it had to be sent to God through the offering ceremony. She promised to use the other half to fix up the temple. The saint figured if she invested the whole amount, she'd fill up 40% of her holy power and maybe figure out why Ordell got sick. But right now, the main thing wasn't fixing the energy leak, but bringing the great temple of the sun god back to life, so she decided not to be stingy. Eric was the most stoked about the news, pointing out they needed funds to maintain the temple. Seth asked who the saint was planning to invite. Then she remembered there was someone else who needed an invite. Count Kiris held the invitation to the ceremony in his hands. The guy blew his top, yelling, "What the heck is this offering ceremony?" He said he was already messed up enough by that dimwit selling off land, and now this offering ceremony crap. The Count had once told his good-for-nothing daughter she could live it up or raise hell there, but to forget about ever coming home. Her only job was to protect her position as the saint of the great sun god temple, and she dared to screw even that simple order up. The guy was seriously ticked because he thought the girl was messing around with pointless nonsense. He was also furious that she dared sign the letter to him as daughter of the sun god Ordell. He was terrified that if the boss found out about the problems Ordell was causing, he'd be toast. So he decided he had to get over there immediately and shut her down. 5 days until the offering ceremony, and everything was running like clockwork. Duke Root Shiori was the first to arrive. The saint greeted him, mentioning he was earlier than expected. The Duke replied that since she'd asked him personally, the sooner he arrived, the more he could shine, so he hurried. Then another guest showed up, saying her invitation arrived late, and she almost missed it. But even if the invite hadn't come, she'd still have come to visit, and Yuri also thanked them for the invitation. The saint acknowledged it was terrible and promised to oversee invitation deliveries next time to prevent a repeat. Duke Shiori rudely cut in on the lovebirds and commented that the temple had changed a lot lately, and asked if they'd been doing renovations. The saint confirmed she'd recently met some good people who helped her find various workers. She explained that they were her personal maid's parents, who'd visited recently and left a generous donation. The Duke sadly figured she'd found another sugar daddy, while the saint assumed Ruth didn't like the renovations. Ordell thought it looked great, but apparently June and Yuri weren't feeling it either. The saint told the guests that they'd completely renovated all the guest rooms for the ceremony. She was sure that once they went inside and checked them out, they'd change their minds, because they'd definitely love them. By the way, Shiori's room for the Duke was prepared with extra care, choosing a spot with a killer view. The Duke took it as a sign that he was way more important to the saint and offered to handle all her donations for her. Then the saint mentioned that his room was right next to her bedroom and suggested he wait there. The Duke got flustered and asked her to clarify what she meant by his room being next to hers and what he was supposed to be waiting for. Just then, Victoria warned the saint that someone was approaching the main gates. Ordell was thrown for a loop. It was way too early for the Earl and Countess to show up. Turns out the guest rolling up was Earl Kiris. Earl Kiris pointed out that they were all meeting in a pretty unexpected spot and gave Duke Shiori a special hello. The Duke shot back that he was just as surprised the saint had invited the Earl, and the Earl figured His Excellency was here too. The saint confirmed she'd invited them both, calling them important guests of the temple. The Duke was thinking, if they've got beef with the Earl, why even invite him in the first place? Earl Kiris straight up called Ordell insane for inviting Duke Shiori. The saint thought to herself that it was kinda weird Root showed up early to get blessed before the ceremony. Then the saint politely turned to the Earl, mentioning he was there pretty early and asking if he had other business nearby. Truth is, Ordal thought he'd be the last to arrive, then realized the Earl probably came to keep an eye on her moves at the temple. The Earl announced that as the temple's patron and her guardian, he'd come early to see everything and talk in person. She asked him to wait a bit since she wanted to show the Duke to his room first. Then she called the Knight Victoria, instructing her to escort the Earl to the reception room. The saint wondered why the Earl made Ordal a fake saint. The original story said it was for honor. After all, the Curie's family, being provincial aristocrats, successfully entered central aristocratic society after that. However, if that were the only reason, there shouldn't have been any need to interfere with Ordal's activities. Meanwhile, the Earl asked the saint in a sharp tone why she hadn't informed him in advance about such an important matter as the charity project. The saint replied, "Isn't it natural for the Temple of the Sun God to produce healing potions?" And added that the high priest said they had done it before, so she didn't think she needed to inform the Earl about it. The Earl flew into a rage, yelling that Ordal had no right to think that way and that she shouldn't make such judgments. He straight up said she was a fake, only in that position because of him, and ordered the project shut down immediately. The guy threatened to go running to the high priest, and the saint thought to herself, like they weren't already swimming in cash. Ordal figured there was no way Eric would just roll over for the Count now. She asked how she was supposed to explain this to the Duke, who'd sunk a ton of money into it, and the Count just said that was her problem. He finally let her hold off on it until after the ceremony, since the Duke was already here, but told her to keep sweet-talking the Duke in the meantime. After he left, the saint fumed to herself, saying he just dumped his garbage and walked out, not even letting her get a word in edgewise. Jeremy, who'd accidentally overheard the whole thing, popped his head in and asked the saint if he should take the Count out. The saint hesitated, saying they couldn't just go around offing people even though she really wanted him to drop dead. But then she firmly ordered him to hold off for now, since they still needed to dig into a few things. The guy agreed and vanished. The saint's plan was to hint to Ruth that the old geezer was mistreating her, and use that as a ticket to bail from the Count's mansion. Would the Duke even bother helping if she suddenly shut down the potion project, even if it meant meeting up to get his blessing? Originally, Count Cyrus was a character obsessed with ambition and power. When he found out Ordal was a fake saint, he ditched her instantly. He ended up climbing to the highest circles of the Empire and became a marquise. Naturally, the book's fans were not happy. Well, the Count didn't get what he deserved, but the author just kept saying that good doesn't always triumph over evil in the world. The saint scoffed, calling it total bull and mentally cursing the author Ju Hyun Jin. Saint Adela is a novel written by her best friend, one she loved so much she'd reread it multiple times. But she never imagined she'd end up in it. She wanted to drag the author here and ask what the heck was up with the Count's behavior. The saint sighed, resolving to do what she could, step by step, and called for Jeremy. He eagerly asked if they were going to off the Count this time. The saint refused and asked for a favor. Jeremy was surprised, saying she could just order him to do it. The holy woman shot back, saying she wasn't his owner and he wasn't a slave, so she was asking him to keep an eye on the guy she was just with. Jeremy cheerfully agreed, saying it was a piece of cake, and started to leave. The holy woman called after him again and wished him a good trip. Jeremy awkwardly replied that he was going, and the holy woman thought the guy was really sweet, but her thoughts drifted back to the Count. She started wondering why Count Cyrus had made her a fake holy woman, and what was the reason for his obsession with Ruth. And finally, why was he trying to stop the revival of the Temple of the Sun God? The holy woman irritably said she wanted to kick the Count out as soon as possible. Monica replied that she could do it right now. The holy woman admitted she'd love to, but she couldn't, because she needed to figure some things out first. When Count Cyrus saw the great temple being repaired, he burst out yelling that the repairs were like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. The guy accused her of throwing money down the drain. Then he saw the modest guest room. He flew into a rage and indignantly asked if she was suggesting he live in that dump. The saint admitted to herself that she gave Count Cyrus a messy guest room because she wasn't about to give him a good one. The original Ordal was crazy for the Count's love. The saint felt for her, imagining how much it must have sucked to get dumped. Monica promised the temple would protect the saint from now on and told her not to put up with any crap, to do what she felt was right if the Count pulled anything. The maid told the saint she was done drying her hair, and the saint thanked her for her work today. Monica said the captain of the Holy Knights declared that nighttime was the most dangerous time, and he couldn't trust the saint's protection to just one person. That's why, from now on, 2 knights would be on duty in the saint's chambers at night, 'cause Jeremy needed his rest too. The maid left, wishing the saint a good night. Left alone, the saint pondered her situation. She was super grateful for the knights and the maid's concern, but something was bugging her. Would they still be the same if they found out she was a fake, a half-breed saint? She was gripped by fear about how they might react. What if they got mad, felt like they'd been tricked and betrayed? These heavy thoughts were weighing her down, so Ordell stepped out onto the balcony to clear her head in the fresh air. Suddenly, Duke Shiori's voice reached her ears, declaring that the sun god had heard his fervent desire to see her. He asked if she liked wine, noting that there wasn't a rule against alcohol, and the saint enthusiastically agreed. Then Ordell praised the taste and added that she didn't know her limit yet, and might screw things up. She asked the Duke, if she happened to get drunk and start acting wild, to tie her up good and throw her on the bed. The Duke joked that if he touched the saint's body like that, the people from the Great Temple wouldn't leave him alone. The saint replied that, on the contrary, they'd say Ordell was at it again, and thank him for calming down the rowdy girl. The Duke agreed, promising to tie her up. But to himself, he noted that the saint seemed completely unaware of how her attendants looked at her. Because it's clear they're genuinely devoted. Then the holy woman said that before she got even busier, she needed to bless the Duke right away. The Duke unbuttoned his shirt and declared he was ready. When Duke Shiori moved in real close for the blessing, the holy woman got flustered, thinking she didn't know where to look. The heroine asked him to back up a bit, saying he didn't need to get so close, and the Duke asked why she was looking away. The holy woman stammered, explaining that full exposure was risky, and promised she'd recharge him a different way from now on. She activated her skill and announced the good news. After this time, she'd be able to maintain the blessing for 2 months. The holy woman added that her divine power would increase after the upcoming offering, so Root wouldn't have to come so often, and it'd be less of a hassle. The Duke said, with a slight reproach, that the holy woman shouldn't tell a believer not to come often, since it hurts their feelings. He explained that the great temple of the sun god was the only place where he could let his guard down and relax. Root also mentioned that he felt most comfortable when he spent time alone with her. The saint figured this meant he totally trusted her, and struck by the Duke's closeness, she noticed he was even more gorgeous up close. Flustered, she told him he could come by whenever he wanted, and asked him to let go of her hand. Then the Duke stepped even closer, and asked if the saint knew there was someone walking on the ceiling of the great temple. He explained that when he first arrived at the temple, this someone was following her, but at some point they started following Count Kiris instead. The saint was surprised the Duke noticed Jeremy's presence, since even Eric and Seth couldn't detect him because of her divine power. Suddenly, the heroine asked the Duke if he was a swordmaster. The Duke clarified that he was a magic swordsman. He explained he uses both sword and magic to achieve similar power, so there's only a slight difference. The saint, seeing that she'd been found out, decided there was no point in hiding it anymore. She admitted there was a guy walking on the ceiling. This guy's gifted. She borrowed him from the great temple of the sea god, and now he's here as her secret bodyguard. The saint clarified that the sea god's temple sent an assassin and she, dealt with him and caught him, then rehabilitated him. The Duke was floored. The holy woman explained her bodyguard had a special ability, so regular folks couldn't spot him. The Duke agreed, saying he felt like if he looked away for even a second, he'd lose track of him. The Duke smugly thought to himself that he was the only one who could notice the guy. The holy woman admitted to herself that Root's abilities were outstanding, but he was still just human. She figured it was impossible for a mere mortal to sense divine power. The key might be the mysterious golden aura swirling around him. In the morning, the holy woman was happy to find her body was totally fine, even though she and Root had downed 3 whole bottles of wine the night before. She mentally thanked Ordell for being such a lush, because ever since then she and Root had been meeting on the balcony at night for drinks. The wine, endlessly appearing from Root's pocket dimension, was perfect for blowing off steam. With 2 days left until the offering ceremony, the last invited guests, the Hentel couple, finally arrived at the great temple. Countess Hentel, seeing the holy woman, loudly shouted a greeting. Then, she angrily demanded to know if the low-down scoundrel who ruthlessly slapped their aristocratic daughter's face was here. The saint said she did invite Count Kiris, but Baron Gale showed up on his own, uninvited. The Countess said she trusts the saint. She's just got a one-track mind about taking that lowlife out, but she won't ruin the ceremony. She pointedly mentioned that their trip back won't involve the Great Temple at all. The saint promised to pretend she didn't hear anything. To herself, Ordell thought the Countess was the scariest person she'd met here. Count Chris and Baron Gale followed the maid down the hall. The Baron guessed the organizers caught wind of the banquet and prepared. Though he doubted it, saying at best, they'd get an extra bread roll out of it. The Count grimly remembered what they'd been fed the last few days, and added that it'd be a win if they got one decent bite. Despite these bleak predictions, the guests were politely ushered into a lavish banquet hall. They were greeted courteously and welcomed to the banquet. The Count and Baron were floored. They couldn't believe it, exclaiming that everything was perfectly prepared. The temple servants and residents were blown away by the banquet's beauty and decorations, exclaiming how gorgeous everything was. One of them, with tears in his eyes, admitted he never thought he'd see the day, 'cause you wouldn't even recognize this place. Seeing that everyone was enjoying it, the saint expressed her joy too, noting to herself that it was worth opening everything up specially on the day of the banquet, after all the work was done. She also noticed that those who didn't like the changes to the temple looked pretty sour. Ordell thought with a smirk that Count Kiris, sitting at the very end of the table, was probably even more uncomfortable. Then she added that he deserved it, since he donated the least and wasn't even a believer, so there was no way she'd put him at the head of the table. Duke Shiori turned to the saint and remarked that she looked very pleased today. The saint replied that it would be weird if she wasn't, and the Duke commented that the banquet was magnificent, and the chef's skill was simply outstanding. Duke Shiori remarked that he hadn't expected any of the saint's new acquaintances to be from the Hentel family. The saint thought to herself that Madame must have decided to cultivate a relationship with Jun instead of Root, and explained to the Duke that her personal maid, Monica, was the eldest daughter of the Hentel family. Ordell mentally noted that Baron Gale seemed completely clueless that the girl he'd smacked around was sitting right next to him. The Duke confessed he was getting worried that the saint wasn't happy with him being her sugar daddy anymore, but she reassured him, and she reminded him that she's so greedy, the more sugar daddies, the better. Plus she made an important clarification, that in the future she's unlikely to find a sugar daddy as special as the Duke. She compared him to a vault filled with the most valuable treasures. The Duke clearly liked that comparison. He repeated with satisfaction that he was a vault for storing the most valuable thing. Smugly, he agreed that yeah, he had that quality about him that everyone desired him. Yuri thought to himself that Shiori could never get used to seeing the Duke looking so blissed out. With a smile, June mentally noted that it was the first time she'd ever seen the Duke act that way with a woman. That evening, the saint brought several dishes to her room, and she asked Jeremy to eat slower. The guy explained that at the Great Temple of the Sea God, they didn't give him food, saying he wouldn't die even if he didn't eat. He mentioned he was working up quite an appetite, while the saint was furious at the priest's brutality. She vowed to herself she wouldn't let this slide, and reassured Jeremy, telling him she'd provide more if the food ran short. Full and satisfied, the guy leaned back on the sofa and thanked them for the meal. Ordell asked him how tailing Count Kiris went. Jeremy said it was a bit rough, explaining that the guy kept bad-mouthing the saint, and it was hard for him to listen to. Ordell asked if he'd overheard anything else. Jeremy said the Count mentioned it wouldn't be good if the Sun God Temple made a comeback. The saint figured the Count making Ordell a fake saint wasn't just for his family's gain, like she'd thought. His real goal was the complete downfall of the great Sun God Temple. Looking out for his family was just a cover. If he wanted everything to collapse from the inside by making Ordell, the saint, incapable, then it all adds up. She remembered that in this novel, the Count wasn't the only one who wanted the sun god to fall, meaning someone else is backing him. The saint asked Jeremy to tell her everything from the beginning, slowly and with all the details. The kid was totally down with it. The day of the offering ceremony finally rolled around. The high priest told the Holy Maiden that everything was set for the ceremony. Monica asked the commander of the Holy Knights if it was true that their Holy Maiden was beautiful. He was all respect, saying it was an honor to serve the daughter of the sun god and be so close to her. The Holy Maiden, figuring everyone was waiting, suggested they head out. She said she was counting on the commander of the Holy Knights to escort her. Seth swore he'd protect her with his life. The heroine thought sarcastically to herself that all that seriousness was a bit much. It's just an escort, not like they're going to war. When they got to a certain spot, the commander of the Holy Knights said the Holy Maiden had to go on alone from there. Then the high priest greeted our heroine, telling her he'd been expecting her. The saintess thought with relief that she'd finally made it to this point. She then jokingly figured that even the sun god himself must be crying tears of joy right now. The offering pouch suddenly floated up from the tray on its own and flew towards the chest of the sun god statue. Everyone present gasped in shock. The saintess felt that familiar, pleasant, and warm feeling of being blessed. The system announced that 15,000 gold had been deposited into the donation box. The saintess's divine power increased thanks to the believers' donations. The golden light emanating from the box restored some of the sun god's power, and the saintess received a blessing, as a result of which her divine power rose to 25%. Also, the skill inventory has been unlocked. After the ceremony, there was a little tea party. Count Hentel told the saintess she almost looked like she was gonna cry when the light lit up at the altar. The countess chimed in, saying she definitely saw tears welling up in Ordel's eyes. The saintess giggled, all embarrassed. Then she thanked Monica for working so hard to dress her up, said she looked so presentable, it was impossible to look away. June complimented the heroine on her thorough preparation, saying you could really feel it. Then she guessed the high priest was super tired. Eric humbly replied that he was just doing his duty, but it was nice to hear, since he was digging through old records and prepping in a new way. Yuri remarked that the Holy Knights looked so dignified too, and you could tell how hard they'd been training. Ordel pointed out that it was all thanks to their captain. June smiled and said the saintess was like a mom who can't hide how proud she is of her sons. The saintess jokingly suggested Eric and Seth start calling her Mom from now on. The high priest whispered for the saintess to cut it out. She confessed you could see the exhaustion on the knights' faces, but they were pretending everything was fine. June, all playful, said those two were as gorgeous as flowers, and she totally gets why the saintess would worry about pretty blooms. Everyone there was floored by the comparison, so the Duke chimes in, saying he's just as good looking. And with a hint of hurt, he asked why she wasn't worrying about him. The saintess jokingly asked the Duke if he was trying to take her son's place too. The Duke smirked and said love usually goes to the youngest, and now he's curious who's number 1 and who's number 2. The high priest and the commander of the Holy Knights shouted in unison that they weren't her sons. June jumped on the joke, asking with a gleam in her eye who is number 1 in the saintess's heart. The saintess thought hard, remembering that the high priest suffered the most from the original Ordel's actions. He barely kept the poor great temple of the sun god going, and even though he knew she was a fake saintess, he still protected her. In the end, the heroine said his name. June turned to the knight commander, asking if he was bummed about coming in second place. The commander replied that not at all, and that he was actually flattered and really glad she was so worried about him. June asked the Duke how they were going to handle things, since it seemed like the youngest hadn't gotten enough love. The Duke replied that they'd just have to try even harder. To herself, the heroine thought that was a really simple answer. The saint, still joking around, asked the Duke if he wanted to call her Mom too. The Duke declined, saying he'd pass on that one. The saint was surprised by his reaction, noting to herself that he usually played along with jokes, and she didn't understand why he was acting like this today. Later that evening, in her chambers, the saint was checking out her inventory screen. She discovered she could stash potions and holy relics in there, and she happily thought that now, even if she got into a dangerous situation alone, she wouldn't die so easily. She also noticed her divine power had increased. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, followed by a shout that Eric had arrived. Without a second thought, the holy woman hid the screen and told him to come in. The high priest asked what was up. The holy woman said she wanted to ask him about something. She explained that Count Kiris, the moment he arrived, asked her to shut down the potion business. Ordel added that she hadn't been able to meet up with Eric this whole time, and avoiding the Count was way harder. Eric replied, surprised, that this was news to him, and stated that he never discussed the potion business with the Count. He explained that the Count initially suggested putting forward a fake holy woman, and after that idea fizzled out, they barely spoke. Eric remembered that the Count, knowing the great temple of the sea god's predicament, was rushing things, pushing the fake holy woman proposal hard. The priest remarked that the Count seemed to be forcing him to believe that a fake holy woman absolutely had to appear in the temple ASAP. The holy woman mentally added the information she'd gotten from Jeremy. Turns out, before the consecration ceremony, the great temple of the sea god didn't want the sun god to fall, and also they weren't connected to Count Kiris at all. There's only one possibility left, the sun god's old enemy, pure evil itself, who also happens to be the final boss. She figured the Count was one of his lackeys. Then Eric asked the saint what she planned to do with the potion-making business. He also wanted to know if she'd comply with Count Kiris's demand. The saint considered her answer. The next day, the saint announced to Count Kiris that, as he commanded, she was shutting down the potion business. The Count smugly declared that she must follow his orders and asked why she'd rushed over so early for something so trivial. The saint decided not to disabuse the Count, who remained ignorant of her true thoughts. It was better that way. She pointed out that the potion business was the temple's only source of income, and abruptly shutting it down would undermine partner trust. It would also complicate relations with Root Shiori. As a solution, Ordell proposed taking over negotiations with the high priest. If the Count made a donation sufficient to cover shutting down the business, the Count was outraged. He asked if she was hitting him up for cash. The saint, directly and with a smile, demanded a whole lot of dough. She explained that if she left the business, she'd be broke, and she really didn't want that, seeing as there were still so many things she hadn't bought yet. Basically, the girl's planning to use the money to live the high life forever. As an alternative, she suggested the Earl give her land worth 5,000 gold. That way she could rent it out and get money to keep from starving. Earl Kiris asked the saint how much she wanted, and without hesitation, she demanded 10,000 gold. For a second, he was so shocked he couldn't even speak. The guy smirked, realizing that this was her plan all along. Ordell thought to herself that the Earl had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. The saint said she wasn't asking for a huge estate, not that he'd give her one anyway, but until she got the money or the land, she wasn't backing down. She added, "Isn't it great to have land that brings in steady income and not have to work?" The Earl thought indignantly how she could threaten him so brazenly, but the next second he agreed. So he promised to do as she asked, but in return, the saint would have to provide information about Ruth Shiori. Ordell agreed. And she promised that as soon as she got the money and documents, she'd immediately give him the intel on the Duke. So the deal was sealed. The saint thought to herself with a smirk that the Count was just as dumb as she'd figured. In her head, she called him naive if he really thought she'd shut down a booming business. Her plan was simple: take the money and keep on working. The heroine smugly concluded that it was a genius idea. The Hentel couple was also getting ready to leave. The Countess said she wished she could stay a little longer, but unfortunately she couldn't. The saint replied warmly that she was welcome there any time and invited her to come again. Then, the saint asked the Countess how her business talk went. The Countess mentioned that June turned out to be a very good person. The saint noted to herself that the Countess had been chatting with the deputy for a long time, so everything was really going smoothly. Suddenly, the Countess realized she needed to hurry if she wanted to catch up with the carriage carrying Baron Gale, and she said goodbye to the saint. Her husband was resisting, didn't want to say goodbye to his daughter, kept begging for a farewell kiss, but the Countess just shoved him into the carriage. The saint asked Monica if she thought Baron Gale still had his head attached. The girl just laughed. Then she said that since he hadn't tried to off her yet, he was probably still around and, still breathing. The saint was a little surprised that Monica was turning out just like her mother. All right, with all the guests gone, the saint noticed it was just the three of them and called for Jeremy. Suddenly, a young man appeared from the tree branches. Ordell told him that since the Earl was gone, his watch was over. The saint added that he could relax, since he'd done a great job. Jeremy asked if he didn't need to keep an eye on the Earl anymore. The saint confirmed he could forget about him. Victoria, who was listening in, remarked that the guy was seriously brave, considering how long he'd been sitting up there. The saint explained that the area was filled with the sun god's energy, making it hard to find him. But if they leave here, who knows what could happen, so I suggested we avoid going outside if possible. The guy pointed out that we need to get intel from the Count and volunteered to go it alone. He explained that the Count would be less careful on his own turf, so it shouldn't be a problem. The saint confirmed that Jeremy's right, but she doesn't want to put him in harm's way. Jeremy firmly replied that they won't get anywhere without taking a chance, and promised not to do anything reckless. The saint, looking at him, thought she should look serious, but she was distracted by those crumbs on his face. She compared it to sending a green kid on his first mission and admitted that she can't help but worry. Despite her concerns, she agreed, but made him promise that he has to come back safe and sound. Jeremy cheerfully replied that he'll definitely come back in one piece. Then he quickly scrambled up a tree and disappeared, with a bag of cookies and 20 gold coins in his pocket. Now that she was alone, the saint decided it was time to take care of her own business. At the appointed time, Duke Shiori approached the saint, dressed in a way that was unusual for him. The Duke wondered why the saint had asked him to wear plain clothes for their meeting. To herself, Ordell noted that she was now absolutely certain that you couldn't hide an attractive appearance, even under simple clothes. The Duke asked if there was a good tavern in the village, and if she was planning on having a drink. The saint replied that this meeting was for work. The Duke confessed with disappointment that he thought she had invited him on a date. Ordell said that when a man and a woman meet in the same place, it's practically considered a date already. The Duke sighed sadly that there wasn't even a hint of romance, and Ordell gasped in surprise. She pointed to the Duke's carriage and asked reproachfully, "Do commoners usually travel with such a luxurious ride?" The heroine added that neither of them wanted unnecessary rumors. The Duke agreed and declared that they only had one option then. The Duke asked the saint if she'd ever ridden a horse before. In her past life, the saint was athletic enough to ride on her own, but things might be different with Ordell's body. Out loud, she answered no, deciding to pretend she knew nothing about riding since Ordell always traveled in carriages. The Duke apologized for being so forward and helped her into the saddle. The saint even gasped from the surprise. Her heart was pounding like crazy. The Duke asked if she was all right, and the saint thanked him for his help and asked him to give her a heads up next time he wanted to do something like that, because she almost clocked him one. The Duke promised to be more careful in the future. Then the saint mentioned they were heading to a small and very poor village called Liu Bar, surrounded by rocky mountains. Sadly, that village can't produce anything of value. The Duke was surprised, asking if they really needed to go there, since he knew most of the western region. The saint added there was a catch, promising to explain everything when they arrived, making the Duke suspect something important awaited them. So Ordell and the Duke rode hard to the village, stopping on a hill with a good view overlooking it. The saint complained that she almost broke her back riding. The Duke remarked that the village was even smaller than he'd imagined, and asked if it didn't belong to Count Kiris. The saint confirmed it was his land, but soon it would be hers, making the Duke wonder why the Count would suddenly give land to the saint. The heroine explained that the village was rich in sacred stones, and creating holy artifacts required ore filled with sacred energy. These are the sacred stones, like iron is needed to forge a sword, or mana crystals are needed for magic. She wondered if His Grace had ever considered why the temple of the sun god wasn't in the east or south, but specifically in the west. And she answered herself, saying the sun god always knew this land was the most sacred, with vast deposits of sacred stones. She asked the Duke if he even realized how valuable those western mines of his were. For some reason, Root started laughing. The saint asked if the Duke knew the sheer manpower and equipment needed to extract those stones. The girl admitted that the Temple of the Sun God didn't have the resources or workforce to mine the sacred stones. So she directly asked the Duke if he would help them. The Duke noted to himself that this was exactly what he'd expected from a smart person. Even if she sometimes pushes the envelope and seems overly emotional on purpose, it doesn't last long. Because she always calculates the benefit for herself and the temple first, and she does it very cleverly. He admitted to himself that the more he tried to understand her, the more mysterious she became. And that mysterious distance just makes him want to get even closer. Out loud, he agreed, saying he had no reason to refuse such a good offer. However, he was curious how she figured out the sacred stones were hidden there. The saint muttered to herself that, of course, she knew it from the original story, where the novel's protagonist, Idella, bought this land. She could feel the energy of the sacred stones buried here, but the saint herself doesn't have the slightest clue about that energy. The girl thought bitterly that her power, which had grown to 25%, wasn't even close to Idella's level. Aloud, she declared that she'd actually received a revelation from God, who told her that a sacred power was hidden here. The Duke agreed that made sense, but asked with surprise why the saint's eyes were watering. The saint, looking at the seemingly empty land, desperately wondered if she'd just thrown away a ton of money. During sunset, the Duke asked the saint if she felt any better, and she replied that it definitely didn't hurt as much as last time. But she expressed concern about his cloak, which looked too expensive. The Duke said he wouldn't ask her to pay for it. The saint apologized, explaining that her back really hurt, and added that it was nice to get out somewhere after a long time. The Duke remarked that she spoke as if she were locked in the great temple, and offered to help her escape if she was ever imprisoned somewhere. He even offered to run away with him to his mansion, where he has tons of empty rooms. The Duke could provide one of them, including the room next door. The saintess was flustered, and she mentally noted that they were way too close. She could even feel his breath on her neck. The Duke kept laying it on thick, describing how they could meet on the balcony in the evenings and have a drink together. Plus, his estate has a huge selection of amazing wine. The saintess admitted to herself that good wine sounded tempting. But out loud, she said that today wasn't a special day, plus they still had work to do and promised to think about it later. When they were almost at the temple, Ordell wondered why the trip from Lubar took way longer than the trip there. The Duke confessed that he deliberately slowed down so he could spend more time with her. He added that now that they were almost there, they could pick up the pace a little. The commander of the Holy Knights was standing at the steps to the Temple of the Sun God. He told her he'd been waiting for her the whole time. The saint was surprised, asking how he knew when she'd be back. Seth replied that she just told him not to follow her, but she never said anything about waiting. Then he offered to help her down from her horse. Just then, the Duke asked for a moment and dismounted, and declared that a man has to own his choices from start to finish. He added that, after all, a gentleman always risked his neck escorting a lady. The Duke locked eyes with the commander of the Holy Knights. Then he suggested the saint choose whose hand she'd take. Late that evening, Count Curies finally returned to his estate. Jeremy, following Count Curies, arrived at the estate. Soon enough, Baron Gale arrived, and his servant, looking disgusted, asked the master what was going on. The shaking Baron wailed that he thought he was being followed, and now no one trusted him. The man begged the servant to take care of him. Along the way, Jeremy witnessed some seriously messed up and ridiculous stuff. First, Baron Gale fell into a pit full of, well, you get the idea. He couldn't get out on his own, and the servants barely managed to haul the master out of the hole because of the awful stench. Then, a pile of manure landed right on his head, and after that, he ate soup with bugs and dirt in it instead of beans. For a long time afterward, Baron Gale was convinced someone was watching him and saying things. Jeremy used to think revenge was all about slitting throats or chopping off limbs. The young man even considered testing his skills on the Count. But he decided he needed to complete Ordell's mission first and sneak into the estate. But Jeremy ran into a problem. The Baron's stench was so overpowering, just getting close was a challenge. He realized there was no way he could sneak into the mansion like this. Remembering the saint's words, that he should come back safe and sound, and her request to be careful, Jeremy decided he needed to head back to the temple and tell Ordell about this estate. No question. Meanwhile, Seth and the Duke were both reaching for Ordell's hand. She inwardly scoffed, thinking they were making a whole competition out of something so trivial. In the end, the saint took Seth's hand and said she was relying on the Ordermaster at the moment. The commander of the Holy Knights guessed that riding a horse was new to the saint, and she was probably tired. Ordell laughed and replied that her butt was especially tired, then thanked the Duke for the cloak. She promised to wash it and return it right away. The bummed-out Duke grumbled that she hurts him first, then tries to heal him. She protested in surprise that she hadn't hurt him. He dramatically declared that some wounds aren't visible, and the deepest one was now in his heart. The Duke whined that now he's rejected and all alone, he'll just go sulk in the stables if she'd let him. The saint asked if being denied an escort was really that big of a deal. Seth told the saint not to worry. His grace needs to get used to rejection. Then he asked how she liked the village of Liubar. Did she find what she was looking for? Ordell replied that the weather was great, so it was like a walk in the park. A few days later, some woman showed up at the great temple of the sun god. To herself, she thought she'd heard the great temple of the sun god was in ruins, but it looked way better than she expected. The woman figured she was right to trust the Lumen Guild. Priest Dietrich walked up to her. Looking at the guest, he asked who she was and what she was doing there. The woman explained she came because monster attacks had drained her healing powers. The priest was inwardly pleased, since the woman wasn't there to rob or cheat them, but as a guest in need of healing. He was wondering how much they'd rake in from this, and politely suggested escorting her to the high priest right away. In the blink of an eye, the temple's high priest appeared before the woman, introducing himself as Eirik Dirt, and greeted her. He wished her the light of the sun, and the guest thought to herself that he fit perfectly into the great temple of the sun god. The girl was stunned by his dazzling smile, and Eric got down to business, asking if it was true she'd come seeking healing power. The guest explained that the southern desert was a dangerous region, always crawling with monsters, but lately things had gotten worse. The attacks were happening more often, and the number of wounded had increased. She feared they wouldn't last long if things continued this way. That's exactly why the woman had traveled so far. She begged the high priest to start supplying them with sun god potions. Suddenly, the doors burst open and a stunning saint appeared. She announced that this matter should be discussed with her, as the potion-making business was her responsibility. Following the saint, Duke Shiori entered the room. The temple visitor asked, "Who's he?" Root Shiori smirked and said he was going to hit her up after the initiation ceremony, but she beat him to the punch. He said he recognized her right away since the Flo family had put in the most requests with their guild and addressed her as Viscountess Flo. Eric introduced the people who'd shown up in the room, which totally surprised and stunned the woman. Viscountess Flo respectfully greeted the Holy Maiden and the Duke, saying she was thrilled to see them up close. Ordell told her to raise her head, explaining that it would be awkward to have a conversation like that. The Viscountess thought to herself she'd assumed this Holy Maiden would be as rude and arrogant as the Holy Maiden of the Sea God Temple. But it turned out that Holy Maiden Ordell was the complete opposite. She politely offered them seats and suggested they talk. She said she'd love to help, but she couldn't supply potions to the south because of the small production volume, which depends on 3 alchemists. She mentally added that those workaholic specialists could solve the quantity problem. But their constant motto, "Time is money," makes them overwork themselves, which is also a pain. The Viscountess pointed out that monsters always popped up frequently in the desert, but their numbers had never almost doubled like this before. Monsters are a plague, hungry for life. They devour everything and ruthlessly plunge the world into chaos. People don't know where they come from. Ordell knew that the sun god's ancient enemy, the progenitor of all monsters, a force of evil seeking to destroy this world, was simply called evil. And the reason monsters are showing up so often in the southern desert is because their breeding ground, the citadel of evil, is somewhere down there. She pondered, remembering that in the original story, evil didn't start moving until after Idol became the Holy Maiden. She was tormented by the question of why the monsters were acting up so early, and a troubling thought crossed her mind that it was her fault. She stated bitterly that compared to the Great Idol, she was just a temporary Holy Maiden with a small amount of divine power. Ordell suggested apologizing to those who pre-ordered and selling them half the amount and sending the rest south. The Duke noted that demand would only increase, so convincing them wouldn't be easy, but he agreed to try. Viscountess Flo thanked them warmly, declaring that even that would be a huge help. The saint, however, laid down a condition. She wanted to see the situation in the south firsthand. To this, the Duke and the High Priest objected in unison and vehemently. The Duke insisted that there was no need for the saint to go to the dangerous south, and offered to go there with the guild to assess the situation. Irek said that there was no need to go in person, as they could request information from the southern branch of the guild. In her mind, the saint was outraged that these two were in cahoots, and thought that she wanted to find out why the monsters had gone wild earlier than in the original story. Aloud, she exclaimed that she had firmly decided that she would go in person, and that was not up for discussion. Ordell added that the escort of the guild leader and June would be enough for her. Eric, the Duke, and the Viscountess apologized, looking embarrassed. The saint announced that they would be leaving in 4 days and ordered them to be ready. Viscountess Flo obediently agreed and thanked the saint again. Left alone, Ordell noted that she had simply copied the original heroine's behavior, and the effect was significant. She thought that she should do that more often, then supposed that it must be very hot in the south. The heroine was thinking about how this would be her first long journey in this world. She pictured a vast desert, ancient ruins emerging from a sandstorm, and countless stars dotting the night sky. Her thoughts drifted to the people whose fiery spirits had been forged in this harsh land. The girl admitted to herself that she was excited. That night, the saint was informed that Jeremy had returned and was waiting for her. She was surprised that he was able to get back so fast from his mission, considering the distance. She worried he might be hurt, but seeing him eased her heart. His words were hard to understand, not because he was injured, but because he was munching on a cookie. Jeremy reported that he couldn't infiltrate Count Kiris's estate because of the nasty energy coming from it. He'd never encountered anything like it. The saint guessed it was the energy of evil. With her powers back up to 25%, she decided to check things out herself. The girl wasn't about to let this situation get any worse. Jeremy freaked out, saying there was no way she was going alone, and insisted on tagging along. He threatened to follow her in secret if she refused, so Ordell caved and agreed to take him. She promised to swing by the estate on the way back from the south, which made Jeremy genuinely happy. She thought with relief that with a swordmaster and Jeremy along, this trip should be pretty safe. 3 days later, they set off. In this world, they have mana trains that run on magic stones, so they were headed to the station to catch a ride south. The heroine was stoked, saying the station looked like something straight out of Harry Potter, adding that she'd always wanted to ride a train like this. The station chief greeted the Duke, letting him know they were headed south today. He promised to make sure they had a comfortable ride. The Duke replied that it had been a while, but today he was just there to escort someone. When the station chief asked if this person was very important, the Duke introduced the heroine as Lady Ordell, a saint from the Temple of the Sun God. The man remarked that the temple's name rang a bell, and the passengers' clothes did look like the garb of priests and holy knights. He sarcastically concluded that if the Duke said so, then pigs must be flying, then introduced himself as Orlando Carlson, chief of the West Station. He assured them he'd do everything he could to make sure the saint's journey was top-notch. Ordell responded with a traditional greeting, wishing him the sun's glory, and said she was looking forward to working with him. The station chief ordered his subordinates to move the luggage to the first-class cabin, but the maids resisted. They shouted that it was their luggage, and they'd take care of everything themselves, since it was the first time they'd been treated so well. Ordell vowed to herself that she'd make sure things stayed this way, then thanked the Duke for making the trip. She admitted she was surprised at first that he insisted on escorting her, but thanks to him, they're being treated like VIPs. The Duke told her to remember this, and then she could follow his lead, and the gold would just rain down on her. The saint said she had a blast and would be looking forward to next time, and the Duke promised to make the drinks even better. The saint noted with satisfaction that he finally got the message, and just then, Monica reminded her ladyship that it was time to go. The Duke wished Ordell a safe journey and told her to take care, and they said goodbye until they met again. Root was sure they'd meet again when it was time for the next blessing. Even though they just parted ways, he was already looking forward to their next meeting. Stepping inside the compartment, the saint asked in amazement if this luxurious place would be all theirs. Before Monica could even say a word, Ordell happily blurted out that there was even a bed, so the 2 days would fly by. The maid said they'd be in the car right behind hers and told her to call them anytime she needed anything. The saintess was surprised they were leaving. I mean, they were all girls, they could stick together, and there was plenty of room. But they refused again, assuring her not to worry since their car was also first class and totally awesome. Ordell agreed, figuring the maids just didn't want to share a room with their demanding boss. They hadn't realized yet that the saintess had completely changed. The maids thanked her and wished her a good rest. Left alone, she sadly wondered when she'd become a leader worthy of respect. The heroine's thoughts shifted to the train. It was way faster than she thought. At this speed, it's as good as any modern bullet train. Monica said that at first, everyone, from commoners to royalty, was against the idea. They said a hunk of metal couldn't outrun a carriage. Monica said that without the Duke's will, they'd all be stuck in a carriage for like 10 days. Turns out the driving force and biggest investor in the railroads was the current Duke's mother. That woman was booking it toward the trains, said she was sick of the carriage. The main character thought to herself, that wasn't in the book. The saint was all like, how'd she pull that off? Even with the Duke's power, the Empire would push back on that. Victoria jumped into the convo and explained, it's all 'cause their legendary bad attitude and stubborn streak gets passed down in the Duke's family, generation after generation. She declared, Ordell's the only one who can actually talk to the Duke without getting completely screwed over. The main character was thinking, guess the Duke really does like me, and decided, I gotta thank him next time. Just then, the commander of the Holy Knights busted into the compartment, all freaked out, saying, something unexpected's happened. He clarified, the Crown Prince is on this train with us. The saint was pleasantly surprised. In her head, she's like, bingo! That's the last main dude contender from Sacred Adele. She described him as Felix Roan Carnus, the Empire's most powerful mage and Crown Prince. Then she wondered, why's the dude who's always stuck in the palace suddenly showing up on a train heading south? The Crown Prince got word that Duke Root Shiori was spotted at West Station. He was surprised and asked if the Duke boarded the train alone, then wondered what he was doing at the station. The subordinate replied that the Duke arrived with his family and knights in white uniforms with red cloaks, and golden thorns were embroidered on the cloaks. The Crown Prince remarked that it was interesting and ordered them to find out what connects these people to Duke Shiori, who they are, and why they boarded a train heading south. The Saintess complained about the intense heat, noting that as soon as they headed south, the temperature became unbearable. She found it strange to see greenery in the surrounding landscape, and the Viscountess asked her to bear with it a little longer, as they were almost there. She assured her that it would be cooler at the estate than here, and Ordell, looking at the woman, wondered if she was really drinking hot tea right now. The Saintess mentally noted that the biggest problem right now was the clothes, which were terribly hot. The Viscountess suggested that since they were in the south, they should have some suitable clothes made to order, since the local fabric is very soft and breathable. The woman insisted that before they went to the mansion, they should go shopping for clothes. The holy woman asked Victoria to check if there were any knights here who might also need some clothes. The girl replied that it was nothing for the knights to worry about, no big deal. Ordell insisted and said that all expenses would be covered by the temple funds, and Victoria confirmed that she understood. Just then, Monica exclaimed that they were almost there. The holy woman rushed to the window and asked in surprise, "Already?" A little later, they had arrived. Ordell ordered everyone to quickly gather their belongings and get ready to get out of here together ASAP. Victoria anxiously asked, "What if we run into the Crown Prince at the station on the way here?" The holy woman admitted that she had completely forgotten about him because of the heat. The heroine recalled that originally, divine authority was even higher than the imperial families. The Order of the Sun God is located within the empire, and it's not like everyone has to follow the imperial family's orders. Therefore, the holy woman suggested they just ignore him. She told everyone to act super busy and run the other way if they bumped into him, like they didn't even know him. While her people were totally geeking out over how awesome their saint was, she called Jeremy over. She told him to be extra careful and avoid running into the Crown Prince once they got off the train, and Jeremy said he was on it. Monica asked the Viscountess to keep her meeting with the saint's bodyguard on the down low. Meanwhile, Ordell was thinking that they shouldn't try too hard to impress the royal family right away. Even if the prince is okay, there's no guarantee his entourage is, and who knows what kind of trouble they'd get into if they stirred up something nasty lurking in the royal family. And more than anything right now, she needed some fresh clothes to beat this heat. So the group arrived at their destination, and a representative from the Flo family gave them a warm welcome. Everyone was blown away by how beautiful the place was, and the commander of the Holy Knights mentioned how light and comfortable the new clothes felt. And he thanked her for taking care of not just the servants and priests, but the knights too. She told him to knock it off, said it was nothing, but he said what mattered was how good she looked in the clothes, and that the government money was well spent. The heroine thought that Seth always saw the best in her, and now she felt awkward. Just then, Viscountess Flo happily announced that her husband had come to greet them. Ordell wondered to herself, was this stern and scary man really her husband, Viscount Pao? Viscount Pao anxiously asked his wife if she was all right and if she was hurt anywhere, and she replied that she was fine. Then she asked if he was hurt, and the man assured her that he was fine, but that the saint was more important right now. Then he introduced himself as Ricus Flo and thanked the saint for coming all this way. The holy maiden introduced herself as well and expressed her pleasure at meeting him, while mentally noting that she was wrong. The man actually turned out to be a kind person. Suddenly, the Viscount fell to his knees and began begging the saint to help them. He explained that since his wife had set out on her journey, he had launched a campaign, but the damage was just too extensive. He reported that most of the soldiers involved were wounded, and some are in really bad shape. The Viscount and Viscountess said she's their only hope now. The holy maiden told them to stand up, saying they'd come all this way to help, and asked to be taken to the wounded immediately. The Viscountess was surprised she meant right now. The holy maiden explained that since some patients are in critical condition, there's no time to waste. The Viscountess wiped away her tears, thanked the holy maiden, and told her to follow. The holy maiden, turning to her entourage, said many wounded were waiting and told them to hurry. To the knights, she ordered them to act according to Sir Seth's instructions. The Viscountess showed her the first ward of the infirmary and reported that all 8 wards were full. She noted with despair that even with the door closed you could smell the blood. Because of the constant fighting, they'd set up patient rooms in the estate. They hired several qualified doctors, but their numbers were becoming hopelessly small. This woman was saying 10 doctors ain't got nothing on one alchemist, and one priest can outdo 10 alchemists. But figures, alchemists don't usually hang around places this dangerous. The Great Temple of the Vanished Souls down south believes people getting offed by monsters is just part of the natural order. So the priests just sit on their hands. Those guys in that temple don't give a damn about the outside world, they just keep praying inside. And they only come out like once in a blue moon when they're asked to say a prayer for the dearly departed. She added, bitter as hell, that if they'd just worked together, things wouldn't be such a total disaster. The saint recalled that the god of lost souls is one of the Empire's top 3 deities, emphasizing death as something natural. The novel hammered home that nobody should mess with death and only jump into the fight if the world's about to end. Another of the Empire's top 3 was the supreme god of the ocean, and that place demands sacrifice and devotion from its followers. They decided to fight evil from the get-go, but their arrogance kept them from teaming up with others, and they ended up falling. The only ones who made it to the end were the great temple of the sun god. If we could just sway the temple of the lost souls, the future could be different. First, she decided to talk to the priests, telling them the situation was way worse than they thought. She ordered them to prioritize the patients who needed immediate help, ASAP. She tasked the Order of Holy Knights with the other patients, the ones who could be healed with potions. Then she asked the Viscountess to get the maids and servants to help, explaining that anyone could administer medicine. Finally, she announced they were starting treatment now, and pulled out her spatial pouch, and declared that she was about to show them the true power